The day Ethan Calloway's 7-year-old son asked why they lived in a house that felt dead inside, the billionaire CEO had no answer. He'd built an empire worth billions, commanded boardrooms across 3 continents, and made decisions that moved markets. But he couldn't explain to his child why their mansion echoed with silence instead of laughter. That same afternoon, across town in a cramped apartment where the heating barely worked, 6-year-old Sophie Bennett counted coins in a sock, planning something that would accidentally shatter the wall around the loneliest rich man in Chicago. If you want to see how a $5 bill changed everything, stay until the end. And comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and let's begin. The March wind off Lake Michigan had teeth. It sliced through the streets of Chicago's near north side, rattling the windows of Mrs. Harper's bakery and making the door chime sound angry every time someone pushed inside. The bakery had been there since 1987, wedged between a dry cleaner that smelled like chemicals and a bodega run by a Korean family who knew everyone's business. The display case held the same things it always did: chocolate eclairs that were too expensive for most of the neighborhood, butter cookies shaped like flowers, and wedding cakes people ordered months in advance for daughters who'd moved to the suburbs but still wanted the real Chicago taste for their big day. Sophie Bennett's hand shook as she pushed open the heavy glass door. Not from the cold, though her jacket was too thin and had a broken zipper she'd learned to hold shut with her left hand. She was shaking because the crumpled $5 bill in her pocket represented 3 months of work. 3 months of finding quarters under couch cushions when her mother thought she was playing. 3 months of telling the ice cream truck driver no thank you, even when the other kids from school ran past her with rocket pops turning their tongues blue. 3 months of saving the dollar bills her mother's friend Karen slipped her sometimes with a wink that said, "Don't tell your mom." The bakery smelled like butter and sugar and something else Sophie couldn't name, something that made the cramped apartment she shared with her mother seem even smaller by comparison. Everything in here was clean. The floors were so shiny she could see the blurry reflection of the light fixtures. The woman behind the counter wore a white apron that didn't have any stains on it. Sophie approached the counter slowly. She was tall for 6, which made people think she was older until they heard her talk. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. Her mother had done that morning before her shift started at 5 a.m. The elastic was already slipping. "Hi, sweetie." Mrs. Harper had owned this place for 36 years and had seen every kind of customer. She'd seen lawyers buying apology cakes after forgetting anniversaries. She'd seen grandmothers ordering birthday cakes for grandchildren who never visited. She'd seen teenage boys nervously selecting cupcakes for girls who'd break their hearts by June. But something about the little girl with the serious face and the careful way she pulled out that wrinkled $5 bill made her pause. "I need a birthday cake," Sophie said. Her voice was quiet but clear. She'd practiced this in the mirror that morning. "It's for my mom. She's turning 30 tomorrow." Mrs. Harper smiled, but it was the kind of smile adults used when they were about to deliver bad news gently. "A birthday cake. That's very sweet of you, honey. Did your mom send you to order one?" "No." Sophie's hand tightened around the bill. "It's a surprise. She doesn't know." "I see." Mrs. Harper glanced at the $5, then at the display case where the smallest cake started at $42. "And did you want to look at some options?" Sophie had already looked. She'd pressed her face against the same glass 3 times in the past week, always when her mother was working and she was supposed to be at the neighbor's apartment doing homework. She'd memorized every cake in the case. The one she wanted was in the back corner, chocolate with dark frosting and small pink flowers made from something that looked too perfect to be real. It had a little plastic number 3 and 0 stuck in the top, which seemed like fate since her mother was turning exactly 30. "That one," Sophie pointed, "the chocolate one with the flowers." Mrs. Harper's smile got tighter. She'd been poor once, back when this bakery was just a dream, and she was working 2 jobs to save for the down payment. She remembered what it felt like to want something you couldn't afford, to believe that if you just tried hard enough, the math would somehow work in your favor. "Sweetheart, that cake is $65. Sophie's face didn't change. She'd expected something like this. Adults always talked about money and numbers that didn't make sense. $65 might as well have been $600. "I have $5, she said, "and I could come back with more. I'm a very good saver." "I'm sure you are." Mrs. Harper came around the counter and knelt down so she was eye level with Sophie. Up close, she could see the careful way the girl's jacket was held shut, The shoes that were probably hand-me-downs based on how the heels were worn down unevenly. But honey, that cake takes a lot of work to make. The ingredients alone cost more than $5. I can't. The door chime rang again, cutting her off. The sound was different this time, sharper, like the wind had pushed someone inside instead of letting them enter on their own terms. Ethan Calloway had been walking past the bakery with no intention of stopping. He'd been walking for 40 minutes, which his assistant would have been horrified to discover because his schedule didn't include walking as a line item. He was supposed to be in a car. He was supposed to be on his way to inspect the new office building his company had just purchased in the Loop. He was supposed to be returning calls from Tokyo, reviewing the merger documents his legal team had sent at 6 a.m., and approving the final designs for the product launch next quarter. Instead, he was walking through a neighborhood he hadn't visited in 15 years, looking at buildings that were exactly the same as they'd been when he was nobody, when he was just some kid from Pilsen with a laptop and an idea that everyone said would fail. The bakery had been instinct more than intention. He'd smelled the sugar and remembered something he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the birthday cakes his mother used to buy from a place that looked exactly like this, back when his father was still alive and birthdays meant something other than another year of disappointment. Now he stood just inside the door, his $2,000 suit drawing a line between him and everything else in the room. He hadn't meant to listen to the conversation happening at the counter. He'd meant to grab a coffee. Did they even serve coffee? And leave. But he heard the little girl's voice, heard her say, "I'm a very good saver," with the kind of dignity that made his chest hurt. Ethan Calloway was 32 years old. He employed 4,000 people across 6 countries. His face had been on the cover of Fortune magazine twice. Forbes estimated his net worth at $2.3 billion, though they were off by about $400 million. He owned a house in Lincoln Park worth $8 million, though he'd never bothered to hang pictures on most of the walls. He drove a car that cost more than some people's houses, though lately his driver handled that while Ethan sat in the back seat and pretended to read reports. He had everything except the ability to remember the last time he'd felt like his life meant anything. "Can I help you?" Mrs. Harper had stood up from her conversation with Sophie and was now looking at Ethan with the particular expression people used when they recognized him but weren't sure if they should say so. Ethan started, then stopped. He looked at Sophie, who was still standing at the counter with her $5 bill held out like it was a winning lottery ticket. Her face was serious in a way that made her look older than 6, or maybe it just made her look tired. He knew that look. He'd seen it in the mirror often enough. Their eyes met for exactly 3 seconds. "Why do your eyes look sad?" Sophie asked. The question hit him like a physical thing. Mrs. Harper made a small noise that might have been surprise or disapproval. It was hard to tell. Ethan opened his mouth and found he had no answer ready. He'd been asked thousands of questions in his life. Reporters asking about quarterly earnings, investors asking about 5-year plans, his son asking why mommy wasn't coming home. But nobody had asked him why his eyes looked sad, because nobody had noticed. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Harper said quickly, putting a hand on Sophie's shoulder. She says what she thinks." Sophie apologized to the gentleman. "Don't." The word came out harder than Ethan intended. He cleared his throat, tried again. "Don't apologize. She's right." The silence that followed was the kind that makes people uncomfortable. Mrs. Harper looked between Ethan and Sophie like she was watching a play she hadn't bought a ticket for. Outside, a bus hissed past. Someone shouted something in Spanish. A car horn blared. Ethan took 3 steps forward and looked down at Sophie properly. She didn't look away. Most adults couldn't hold his gaze for more than a few seconds before they got nervous, but this kid just stared back with dark eyes that seemed too old for her face. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sophie Bennett. I'm 6.5. I live on North Avenue with my mom. We don't have a dad because he left when I was a baby, but that's okay because my mom says we don't need people who don't want to be here." She said it all in one breath, like she was reciting facts for a school report. Ethan felt something crack open in his chest. "I'm Ethan." "I know who you are." Sophie tilted her head. "You're on TV sometimes. My mom says you're very rich." "Your mom's right." "Are you happy?" Mrs. Harper made another noise, definitely disapproval this time. "Sophie, honey, that's not... You can't just ask people." "No," Ethan said quietly. He wasn't looking at Mrs. Harper. He was looking at Sophie, at this impossible child who asked questions like she was collecting data for something important. I'm not happy. Sophie considered this. She looked at the $5 bill in her hand, then at the cake in the display case, then back at Ethan. My mom isn't happy either. She cries sometimes when she thinks I'm sleeping, but tomorrow is her birthday and I'm going to buy her that cake with the flowers, and then maybe she'll be happy, at least for a little while. The practical impossibility of the plan didn't seem to concern her. She believed in it the way children believe in things, absolutely, without room for doubt. Ethan looked at the cake, looked at Sophie, looked at Mrs. Harper, who seemed caught between customer service instincts and genuine concern about where this conversation was heading. "How much is the cake?" he asked. $65, Mrs. Harper said carefully. "But like I was telling Sophie, I'll take it." Ethan pulled out his wallet. He had probably $800 in cash, which was absurd because he never used cash for anything. His assistant had insisted he keep it for emergencies, though they'd never defined what kind of emergency required $100 bills. "And whatever else she wants." Sophie's eyes went wide. "I can't. I only have $5. Then you'll be my partner." Ethan knelt down, the expensive fabric of his suit pants pressing against the bakery's clean floor. At this angle, he could see Sophie properly, could see the careful way her hair was pulled back, the small scar above her left eyebrow, the winter boots that were slightly too big and had been stuffed with newspaper to make them fit. "You pay $5, I'll pay the rest. We'll both make your mom happy. Deal?" Why would you do that? It was a fair question. Ethan had been asking himself the same thing. Why was he here? Why did he care about a little girl buying a birthday cake for a mother he'd never met? Why did the sight of that wrinkled $5 bill make him think about his own son? About Noah sitting in their enormous house with a nanny who was kind but not family, who did her job but couldn't fix the thing that was broken? Because, Ethan said slowly, tomorrow is my birthday too, and I don't want to spend it alone. It wasn't quite true. His birthday was in November, but it felt true in some way that mattered more than facts. Sophie studied his face for a long moment. Then she stuck out her hand for a formal handshake. Okay, deal. Her hand was small and warm in his. Ethan shook it seriously, like they were signing a contract worth millions instead of splitting the cost of a chocolate cake. Mrs. Harper watched this exchange with an expression that suggested she'd seen many strange things in 36 years of running a bakery, but this was making the top 10. So, you want the chocolate cake with the flowers? And cookies, Sophie said, gaining confidence now. The ones shaped like flowers. My mom likes flowers. And maybe, she looked at Ethan uncertainly. And ice cream, Ethan finished. Vanilla and chocolate, whatever she likes. She likes both. Then both. Mrs. Harper started pulling items from the display case, wrapping them carefully, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. While she worked, Sophie looked up at Ethan with an expression that was part gratitude, part confusion, part something else he couldn't identify. Are you really sad? She asked quietly. Even though you're rich? Ethan sat down on one of the small chairs near the window, chairs meant for children, which made him look ridiculous with his knees nearly touching his chest. Yeah, I'm really sad. Why? My wife died 2 years ago. Car accident. Now it's just me and my son, and I'm not... He stopped, surprised by his own honesty. He'd been to therapy. He'd had countless people tell him it wasn't his fault, that grief takes time, that he was doing the best he could. But he'd never said out loud what he was about to say to this 6-year-old girl in a bakery. I'm not very good at being a dad. Sophie sat down in the chair across from him. She arranged herself carefully, like she was practicing being an adult. My mom says being a parent is the hardest job in the world. She says she messes up all the time, but as long as she keeps trying, that's what matters. Your mom sounds smart. She is. She used to be a nurse, but then my dad left and she had to drop out of school to work more. Now she's a waitress at a diner on Western Avenue. She works really hard. Too hard, probably. Sometimes she falls asleep during my bedtime story. Sophie swung her legs, which didn't quite reach the floor. Do you work too hard? Ethan laughed, though it came out sounding more like a cough. Yeah, way too hard. Why? Because if I'm working, I don't have to think about other things. Like being sad? Like being sad? Sophie nodded like this made perfect sense. My mom does that too. She works extra shifts so she doesn't have to think about my dad leaving. I heard her tell her friend Karen that. They sat in silence while Mrs. Harper finished packaging everything. The total came to $93.40. Ethan handed over a $100 bill and told her to keep the change. Sophie carefully placed her $5 on the counter like it was a sacred offering. "What time is the party tomorrow?" Ethan asked as Mrs. Harper loaded everything into bags. "It's not really a party. It's just me and my mom. We're going to have dinner at home, spaghetti probably, because that's her favorite and it's cheap. And then I was going to surprise her with the cake." Sophie's face fell slightly. "I didn't plan for ice cream. I don't think our freezer is big enough for all this." Ethan had a freezer the size of Sophie's entire apartment, probably. 3 freezers, actually, in the house that echoed. What if... He stopped himself. This was crazy. He'd already done the crazy thing by buying the cake. He should take the tax write-off on the donation, feel good about his charitable impulse, and go back to his regularly scheduled life of conference calls and loneliness. But something about the way Sophie looked at him, like he was a person instead of a headline, like his sadness was visible and therefore real, made him keep talking. "What if my son and I joined you for the birthday dinner?" Mrs. Harper's hands froze in the middle of tying a ribbon around the cake box. Sophie's eyes went wide again. "You want to come to our apartment? If that's okay, if your mom wouldn't mind." Even as he said it, Ethan knew how insane this sounded. He was a billionaire who employed security teams and had his calendar managed down to 15-minute intervals. He didn't show up at strangers' apartments for spaghetti dinners. But Sophie was already nodding, her whole face transforming with excitement. "She won't mind. She's always saying we should make more friends. And your son, how old is he?" 7. His name is Noah. Noah and I could be friends. Does he like games? We have Uno and this old Monopoly set from the thrift store that's missing some of the pieces, but we made new ones out of buttons. Ethan thought about Noah, who had every toy imaginable and played with none of them, who had a game room in their mansion with vintage arcade machines and a PlayStation and a basketball hoop and custom-built shelves full of board games still in their plastic wrap, who spent most of his time sitting quietly in his room, reading books that were too advanced for a 7-year-old, looking out the window at nothing. "He likes games," Ethan said. "He'd like Monopoly with button pieces." Sophie grabbed his hand without warning. Her fingers were sticky from something, maybe the chocolate she'd been eyeing earlier. "This is going to be the best birthday ever. My mom is going to be so surprised. She thinks I forgot her birthday because I didn't say anything this morning, but I was just being sneaky." "You're good at being sneaky. I practice a lot." Sophie was practically bouncing now. "Oh, we live at 2847 North Avenue. Apartment 3B. Is 6 o'clock okay?" That's when my mom gets home from her shift. Ethan pulled out his phone and typed the address. His assistant was going to have questions. His driver would definitely have questions. His security team would run a background check on the building and probably advise against the entire thing, but he typed it anyway. 6 o'clock works. Mrs. Harper finally found her voice. "Mr. Calloway, are you sure about this? I mean..." She lowered her voice, though Sophie could obviously still hear. "You don't know these people." "No," Ethan agreed. "I don't." But he wanted to. For reasons he couldn't fully explain, he wanted to sit in an apartment that probably wasn't much bigger than his walk-in closet and eat spaghetti with a woman who fell asleep during bedtime stories because she worked too hard, and a little girl who saved coins in a sock and asked why people's eyes looked sad. He wanted to bring Noah somewhere that wasn't carefully curated for a billionaire's son, somewhere real. "I should go," Ethan said, standing up. His knees made a sound that reminded him he wasn't 22 anymore. "I have meetings, but I'll see you tomorrow, Sophie." "Tomorrow," Sophie confirmed. She was holding the bag with the cookies like it contained actual treasure. "Thank you for being my birthday cake partner." "Thank you for asking why my eyes look sad." He meant it. Nobody had asked him a real question in so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to answer honestly. Ethan left the bakery and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, feeling the March wind cut through his expensive suit. His driver was waiting 3 blocks away where he told him to park. His phone had accumulated 17 missed calls. The Tokyo deal needed his attention. The merger documents were still unread. None of it seemed to matter as much as it had an hour ago. He started walking, pulling out his phone to call Noah's nanny. Maria, it's Ethan. What's Noah doing right now? His piano lesson just finished. He's reading in his room. Maria had been with them for 18 months. She was competent and kind and everything a nanny should be. She was also clearly confused by the call because Ethan never called to ask what Noah was doing. He usually just checked the daily report she emailed each evening. Can you tell him I'll be home for dinner tonight and that we're doing something special tomorrow? Tell him. Ethan paused at the corner, waiting for the light to change. Tell him we're going to make a new friend. A new friend? Her name is Sophie. She's 6. She asks a lot of questions. There was a long pause. Are you feeling all right, Mr. Calloway? Honestly, I'm not sure. The light changed. Ethan crossed the street, already thinking about how to explain this to Noah. How to prepare him for an apartment that would be nothing like their world. How to teach him, in one evening, that happiness didn't come from having everything. It came from sitting across from someone at a small kitchen table and being seen. His phone buzzed. Another meeting reminder. Another email marked urgent. Another demand on his time from people who needed him to be the version of Ethan Calloway, who made money and solved problems, and never asked questions about why his eyes looked sad. He ignored it all and kept walking. Across town, in the apartment on North Avenue, Sophie pushed open the door carefully because the lock was tricky and you had to jiggle the key just right. The apartment smelled like the cheap vanilla candle her mother kept burning to cover up the smell of their neighbor's cooking. The furniture was old but clean. The walls needed paint. The radiator made noises like it was angry about having to produce heat. Sophie set the bag of cookies on the kitchen counter, the small counter that could barely fit 2 plates side by side, and looked around their tiny home. Tomorrow, a billionaire was going to walk through this door. His son was going to sit at their wobbly table and play Monopoly with button pieces. They were going to eat spaghetti from mismatched plates and sing happy birthday using forks as microphones because they didn't have candles. Her mother was going to think Sophie had lost her mind. Sophie couldn't wait. She pulled out the cookies and arranged them on their nicest plate, the one with only a small chip on the rim. Then she went to the closet and found the birthday decoration she'd made last week from construction paper and markers. She'd drawn flowers because her mother liked flowers, even though Sophie wasn't very good at drawing, and they looked more like circles with lines sticking out. The front door opened at 4:30, which meant her mother had gotten cut from her shift early. Emily Bennett walked in looking exactly how she always did after work. Exhausted, slightly damp from doing dishes, her hair falling out of its ponytail, her uniform smelling like coffee and bacon grease. Hey, baby. Emily dropped her purse on the floor and immediately went to hug Sophie, even though she always said she was gross after work and needed to shower first. How was your day? Did you finish your homework at Mrs. Rodriguez's? Yeah. Sophie hugged her back, breathing in the familiar smell of diner and cheap shampoo, and something else that was just mom. How was work? Slow. They sent me home early, which means less money, but at least I get to see you. Emily pulled back and looked at the kitchen counter, noticing the cookies for the first time. Where did those come from? I bought them. For your birthday tomorrow. Sophie watched her mother's face carefully. Emily's expression did something complicated. She looked happy and sad and worried all at once. Sophie, honey, you didn't have to. How did you even... I've been saving, and I had a partner. His name is Ethan, and he's very rich but also very sad. And he's coming to dinner tomorrow with his son Noah, who is 7. Is that okay? Emily sat down heavily in one of their kitchen chairs. I'm sorry, what? So Sophie explained. About the bakery and the $5 and the question about sad eyes. About Ethan Calloway. Yes, that Ethan Calloway, the one from TV, and how he'd bought the chocolate cake with the flowers and invited himself to their birthday dinner. Emily's face went through several more complicated expressions. Sophie, we can't... A billionaire isn't going to want to eat spaghetti in our apartment. You must have misunderstood. I didn't misunderstand. He wrote down our address. He's coming at 6 o'clock tomorrow. I need to think about this. Emily put her face in her hands. Baby, I know you were trying to do something nice, but we can't just invite strangers. He's not a stranger. He's my birthday cake partner. That's not... Emily stopped, took a breath, tried again. Even if he was serious, which I doubt, we can't have someone like that here. Look at this place. The ceiling has water stains. The carpet is older than you are. The furniture came from Goodwill. So? Sophie didn't understand why any of that mattered. He said he wanted to come. He said he didn't want to spend his birthday alone. His birthday is tomorrow too? Well, no, but he said it was. I think he was being metaphorical. I learned that word last week. It means saying something that isn't exactly true, but feels true in an important way. Emily looked at her daughter like she was seeing a stranger. Sometimes Sophie said things that made Emily forget she was only 6. Sometimes she seemed older, wiser, like she'd been born understanding things Emily was still trying to figure out. Even if he comes, Emily said slowly, what are we going to feed them? We can't afford spaghetti, your favorite. You said it yourself, it's cheap. Sophie. And I have the cake and the cookies and the ice cream. We'll have plenty of food. It'll be perfect. Sophie took her mother's hands. Please. He has a son who needs a friend, and you always say everyone needs friends. Emily was quiet for a long time. Outside, the radiator clanged. Someone in the apartment below was playing music too loud. A siren wailed past on North Avenue. Finally, Emily squeezed Sophie's hands and said, if he actually shows up, which I seriously doubt, we're going to be very polite and very normal, and we're not going to make a big deal about who he is, okay? Okay. And you're not allowed to ask people why their eyes look sad anymore. But his eyes were sad. I know, baby. But some people don't like being seen that clearly. Emily pulled Sophie into another hug. You're too smart for 6, you know that? You tell me all the time. That night, Emily cleaned the apartment even though it was already clean. She scrubbed the kitchen until her hands hurt. She organized the living room 3 different ways. She pulled out their nicest sheets and made sure there weren't any stains visible on the couch. At 10 p.m., she sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea she couldn't really afford and thought about calling her friend Karen to ask if she was crazy for preparing for a dinner party that would probably never happen. But she didn't call. Instead, she looked at the birthday decorations Sophie had made, at the cookies arranged on the chipped plate, at the small apartment that had never felt small until she imagined seeing it through a billionaire's eyes. And she let herself hope, just a little, that maybe Sophie was right about something. Maybe sometimes the people who seemed like they had everything were actually the ones who needed exactly what you could offer, even if all you had was spaghetti and paper flower decorations, and a daughter who asked questions nobody else thought to ask. Across the city, in a mansion that cost more than most people would earn in several lifetimes, Ethan Calloway sat across from his son at a dining table built for 12 people. They were the only 2 there, sitting at opposite ends like they were strangers at a business dinner. Dad? Noah's voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the space between them. Yeah, buddy? Maria said we're going somewhere tomorrow, to meet a new friend. Ethan looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw himself reflected back. The same eyes that people said looked sad. The same careful posture of someone who'd learned not to take up too much space. The same loneliness disguised as being fine. Yeah, Ethan said. Her name is Sophie. She's 6. She asked me a question today that nobody's asked me in a very long time. What question? Why my eyes look sad. Noah thought about this. What did you tell her? The truth. Noah stood up from his chair and walked the length of the absurdly long table. When he reached Ethan, he climbed into his father's lap like he hadn't done in months, like he was small again instead of 7 and growing too fast. My eyes look sad too, Noah whispered. Ethan held his son and felt something break open that he'd been keeping carefully sealed. I know, I'm sorry. I haven't been here. Not really. Where have you been? It was such a simple question, such a devastating one. Lost, Ethan admitted. But maybe we can try to find our way back, together. Noah nodded against his father's chest. Is Sophie's house going to be different from ours? Probably very different. Good. Noah's voice was muffled but determined. I don't like our house. It's too big and too quiet. Nothing ever changes. Ethan kissed the top of his son's head and made a decision. Tomorrow, they would walk into an apartment that would probably be smaller than their garage. They would eat spaghetti from mismatched plates and play games with missing pieces. They would sit at a table where people actually talked to each other instead of eating in silence. And maybe, if they were very lucky, they would learn what it felt like to be part of something real again. The birthday cake sat in Mrs. Harper's refrigerator overnight, chocolate frosting perfect and waiting. The flowers on top looked almost real in the dim light. Somewhere in the city, Three people who didn't know each other yet were all hoping for the same thing without quite being able to name it. By 6 p.m. tomorrow, everything would change. But for now, they were still separate, still broken in their individual ways, still believing that loneliness was just something you lived with, like weather or taxes or the way buildings cast long shadows in the late afternoon light. For now, they were still waiting. Emily called in sick to work the next morning, which she never did. In 3 years at the diner, she'd shown up with the flu, with a sprained ankle, with a migraine so bad she'd thrown up twice in the bathroom between orders. But this morning she called Danny, her manager, and told him her voice was going and she couldn't make her shift. Danny didn't believe her. "Em, it's Friday. I need you for the lunch rush." "I know, I'm sorry. I'll make it up next week." "You never call in sick." "I know." There was a pause where Emily could hear the diner noise in the background. The clatter of plates, someone shouting an order, the perpetual hiss of the coffee machine that never quite worked right. "This about your birthday?" "Something like that." "Fine, but you're taking the double on Sunday." Emily hung up and looked at the apartment with fresh panic. In the daylight, everything looked worse. The water stain on the ceiling was more obvious. The carpet had a path worn into it from the door to the kitchen. The couch had a permanent indentation where she always sat because the springs were shot on that side. Sophie was still asleep, her small body curled around the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 2. The rabbit's ear was held on with safety pins and dental floss. Emily had promised to sew it properly for 6 months now. She made coffee, the cheap kind that tasted like burnt water, and sat at the kitchen table with her phone. It took her 15 minutes to work up the courage to Google Ethan Callaway. The results were immediate and overwhelming. Pictures of him in expensive suits at charity galas, articles about his company's latest acquisition, a Forbes profile with a photo where he looked stern and untouchable, nothing like the man Sophie had described. There was a Wikipedia page, a net worth estimate that made Emily's stomach hurt. Photos of his house, his mansion really, that looked like something from a magazine about places normal people would never go. And there, buried a few pages deep, were the older articles. The ones about his wife's death. Catherine Callaway, killed in a car accident on Lakeshore Drive. Drunk driver. She died instantly. Their son had been in the car but survived with minor injuries. Emily read the articles twice, feeling intrusive and sad. The most recent one was 18 months old. Some business publication noting that Ethan Callaway had returned to work after a brief personal leave. Brief. Like you could take a brief leave from your wife dying. She closed the browser and stared at her coffee. Maybe Sophie had misunderstood. Maybe Ethan had been humoring a persistent child and never intended to actually show up. Maybe he'd gotten home to his mansion and his staff and his real life and realized how absurd the whole thing was. That would be better, probably. Easier. Emily spent the day cleaning anyway. She couldn't help it. She scrubbed the bathroom grout with an old toothbrush. She washed the windows even though they'd just get dirty again. She moved furniture around trying to make the living room look bigger, then moved it back when that didn't work. At noon, Sophie woke up and found her mother vacuuming for the 3rd time. "Mom, you're being weird." "I'm cleaning." "You cleaned yesterday and the day before." Sophie padded into the kitchen in her pajamas and poured herself cereal. "Are you nervous about tonight?" "No." "You're lying. Your eye does that twitchy thing when you lie." Emily turned off the vacuum. "Okay, yes, I'm nervous. Because there's a very good chance a billionaire is not actually coming to our apartment for spaghetti dinner, and I don't want you to be disappointed when he doesn't show up." Sophie ate her cereal thoughtfully. "He'll show up." "How do you know?" "Because his eyes were sad like yours. And sad people keep their promises because they know what it's like when other people don't." Emily had no idea what to say to that. She sat down across from Sophie and watched her daughter eat store-brand cereal from a bowl with cartoon characters that had been there so long they were half-faded. "What if he does show up?" Emily asked quietly. "What if he comes here and sees how we live and—" She stopped, not sure how to finish. "And what?" "And judges us. And you. And thinks we're poor, struggling, not worth his time. All the things Emily already thought about herself on bad days." Sophie put down her spoon. "Mom, he bought me a birthday cake. He didn't have to do that. He could have just walked away. But he didn't because he's lonely too. Just like us. We're not lonely. We have each other."
Yeah, but we don't have other people. Not really. You work all the time, and I'm always at Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment or school. We don't have, Sophie gestured vaguely. We don't have a family, not a big one, not the kind other kids have.
The observation hurt more because it was true. Emily's parents had died in a house fire when she was 19. Her sister lived in California, and they hadn't spoken in 4 years after a fight Emily couldn't even remember the details of anymore. Sophie's father had 3 other kids with 2 other women and sent a birthday card maybe half the time, always signed with just his first name like he was an acquaintance instead of a parent. "I'm sorry," Emily said. "I'm sorry we don't have more." "I don't want more. I just want—" Sophie thought about it. "I want you to not look so tired all the time. And maybe it would be nice to have dinner with people who aren't just us, just once." Emily reached across the table and squeezed Sophie's hand. "Okay, if they show up, we'll have a nice dinner. And if they don't, it's just you and me and the best chocolate cake in Chicago. Deal?" "Deal." At 3 p.m., Emily started cooking. Spaghetti was cheap and simple, but she made it the way her mother had taught her, with garlic and olive oil that cost more than the regular kind but tasted better, with fresh basil from the pot on the windowsill that somehow hadn't died yet. She made meatballs from scratch, even though the pre-made ones would have been easier. She grated Parmesan that she'd bought on sale last week. Sophie helped by setting the table 4 times in 4 different configurations, trying to figure out how to make their small table look bigger. Eventually, she settled on putting 2 chairs on each side instead of 1 on each end. At 4:30, Emily took a shower and stood under the weak water pressure, trying to decide what to wear. She didn't own anything fancy. Her nicest outfit was a dress she wore to job interviews she never got. Everything else was jeans and t-shirts and the uniform from the diner. She settled on jeans and a green sweater that didn't have any stains. Sophie put on a dress that was too small now, but still her favorite because it had pockets. At 5 o'clock, they sat on the couch and waited. At 5:15, Emily started to relax. This was fine. This was better even. They'd have a quiet dinner, just the 2 of them, and Sophie would be disappointed, but she'd get over it. And Emily wouldn't have to explain why their apartment was so small, or why the radiator made that noise, or why they didn't have any of the things people like Ethan Calloway probably thought everyone had. At 5:47, there was a knock on the door. Emily and Sophie looked at each other. "I told you," Sophie whispered. Emily's hands were shaking as she walked to the door. She looked through the peephole and saw Ethan Calloway standing in the hallway of her apartment building, looking exactly as out of place as she'd imagined. He was wearing jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than Emily's rent, holding a bouquet of flowers that definitely cost more than her rent. Next to him was a small boy with dark hair and the same careful posture as his father. Emily opened the door. "Hi," Ethan said. He looked nervous, which made Emily feel slightly better. "I hope we're not early. We were waiting in the car, but Noah was worried about being late, so you're right on time." Emily's voice sounded steadier than she felt. "Come in." Ethan and Noah stepped into the apartment, and Emily watched them take it all in. The worn carpet, the small space, the birthday decorations made from construction paper. She waited for judgment, for the polite expression that would mean they were regretting this already. Instead, Noah looked around and said, "Your apartment is cozy." "Cozy is a nice word for small," Emily said before she could stop herself. "Small is better than empty," Noah said quietly. Ethan put a hand on his son's shoulder, and Emily saw something pass between them, some understanding that didn't need words. "These are for you." Ethan held out the flowers. "Sophie mentioned you liked them." They were beautiful. The kind of arrangement that came from an actual florist, not the grocery store. Lilies and roses and things Emily couldn't name, wrapped in paper that crinkled expensively. "Thank you. You didn't have to—" Emily took them carefully, aware that her hands were still shaking slightly. "I'll just put these in water." She didn't own a vase. She put them in a pitcher she used for making iced tea. Sophie had already grabbed Noah's hand and was pulling him toward the living room. "Do you want to see my room? It's really small, but I have books. Do you like books?" "I love books," Noah said, and just like that, they disappeared down the short hallway. Emily and Ethan stood in the kitchen, suddenly alone. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come," Emily said. "I wasn't sure you'd actually want us to." Ethan looked around the kitchen, at the old stove, the chipped counters, the refrigerator covered in Sophie's drawings held up with magnets from pizza places.
Your daughter is remarkable, by the way. She's something. Emily wiped her hands on her jeans even though they weren't dirty. I read about you online. I'm sorry about your wife. Ethan's expression closed slightly. Thank you. I just meant, I understand why your eyes look sad. Sophie has a way of seeing things that other people miss. It's kind of her superpower and also occasionally mortifying for me as a parent. That got a small smile. Noah's the opposite. He sees everything but keeps it all inside. I never know what he's thinking. That must be hard. Everything's hard. Ethan said it simply, like he was stating a fact. I have no idea what I'm doing most of the time. I can run a company worth billions, but I can't figure out how to talk to my 7-year-old son. Emily turned to check the pasta even though it wasn't ready yet. I work 50 hours a week and still can't afford to buy my daughter new shoes when she needs them. We're all just making it up as we go. At least you show up for her. I've been hiding in my office pretending work matters more than it does. You showed up here because your daughter asked me why my eyes looked sad and I didn't have a good lie ready. Ethan leaned against the counter. Can I help with anything? You don't have to. I want to. Please. I haven't cooked with another person in 2 years. Maria, Noah's nanny, she doesn't let me in the kitchen. Says I get in the way. Emily handed him a knife and a cutting board. You can slice the bread. It's just grocery store Italian bread, nothing fancy. Grocery store Italian bread is perfect. They worked in silence for a minute. Ethan sliced bread while Emily stirred sauce and tried to wrap her mind around the fact that there was a billionaire in her kitchen doing manual labor with a serrated knife. From Sophie's room, they could hear the kids talking. Noah's voice was quiet but steady, telling Sophie about a book he'd read. Sophie was asking 1,000 questions. He sounds happy, Emily said. He hasn't sounded like that in months. Ethan set down the knife. Our house is too big and too quiet. He spends most of his time alone even when I'm there, which isn't often enough. Sounds lonely. It is, for both of us. Ethan looked at Emily properly for the first time. Your daughter thinks I'm rich and sad, and she's right on both counts. But being here, in your apartment that smells like garlic and basil and something baking, this is the first time in 2 years I've felt like I'm somewhere real. Emily didn't know what to say to that. She checked the pasta again, drained it, started assembling plates. Ethan helped without being asked, figuring out where things went by watching her movements. They called the kids for dinner. Sophie and Noah came running, and Emily saw that Noah was holding one of Sophie's books, a battered copy of Charlotte's Web from the library's used sale. Can I borrow this? Noah asked shyly. You can have it, Sophie said. I've read it 4 times already. You can borrow it, Emily corrected, and give it back next time you visit. She said it without thinking, without meaning to imply there would be a next time. But nobody corrected her. They sat at the small table, 4 plates of spaghetti and meatballs arranged on mismatched dishes. Emily had put out the cloth napkins her mother had given her as a housewarming gift 8 years ago, the ones she never used because they seemed too nice for every day. This looks amazing, Ethan said. It's just spaghetti. It's the first home-cooked meal Noah's had in weeks. Ethan looked at his son. Maria makes good food, but it's not the same as this. They started eating. For a few minutes, nobody talked. Then Sophie said, Noah's afraid of the dark. Emily closed her eyes. Sophie, we don't share other people's private information. It's okay, Noah said quickly. I'm afraid of the dark. Ever since the accident, I sleep with like 6 nightlights. I have a nightlight too, Sophie said. Mine's shaped like a turtle, and it puts stars on the ceiling. Mom got it at a yard sale for $2. That sounds cool. You can come see it after dinner if you want. Ethan smiled, a real smile, not the polite version. See? You made a friend in 5 minutes. That's a record for us. Sophie makes friends everywhere, Emily said. The mailman knows her name. The bus driver saves her the seat behind him. She talked to the mayor once at a street festival about why the city needs more public libraries. What did the mayor say? That she should run for office someday. Emily reached over and squeezed Sophie's hand. She probably will. They talked through dinner about small things. Noah told them about his school, which had a swimming pool and a planetarium, and teachers who called his father when he turned in homework late. Sophie talked about her school, which had a playground with broken swings and a library that was just 1 room with donated books. Ethan asked questions that seemed genuinely interested.
Emily found herself talking about the diner, about the regular customers she'd known for years, about the cook who made the best hash browns in Chicago but couldn't read or write and dictated his grocery orders to whoever would listen. "You should go back to school," Ethan said. "Finish your nursing degree." Emily laughed, but it came out bitter. "With what time and what money? There are programs, scholarships. I could help." "No," Emily said it firmly. "I appreciate the thought, but no." Ethan backed off immediately. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to overstep." "People always think money fixes everything." Emily set down her fork. "But some things aren't about money. They're about time and energy and whether you have anything left at the end of the day to be a person instead of just a paycheck." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Sophie and Noah looked between the adults like they were watching something fragile crack. Then Ethan said, "You're right. I'm sorry. I spend my whole life thinking money is the answer because it's the only tool I know how to use. I spend my whole life wishing I had more of it." Emily picked up her fork again. "So we're both stuck in our own ways." "Mom," Sophie said quietly, "Ethan's trying to be nice." "I know, baby, and I'm being defensive because I'm not used to people being nice without wanting something." Emily looked at Ethan. "I'm sorry too. That was harsh." "It was honest. I appreciate honest." They finished eating in a silence that wasn't quite comfortable but wasn't hostile either. When the plates were empty, Sophie jumped up to get the cake. "Close your eyes, Mom!" Emily obeyed. She heard rustling in the kitchen, heard Sophie's excited whisper, and Noah's quiet response. Then she heard them both sing Happy Birthday, off-key and enthusiastic, with Ethan's deeper voice joining in halfway through. When she opened her eyes, Sophie was holding the chocolate cake with the pink flowers, 6 candles stuck into the frosting because that's how many they'd had in the drawer. The cake was beautiful, too beautiful for their apartment, for their life. Emily felt her throat close up. "Make a wish," Sophie said. Emily looked at her daughter's hopeful face, at Noah's shy smile, at Ethan watching from the background like he wasn't sure if he belonged in this moment. She looked at the cake that had started everything, at the candles flickering in the kitchen light. She wished for more moments like this, more people around their table, more laughter in their small apartment. She wished to stop being so tired. She wished for Sophie to always be this brave, this open, this willing to invite strangers into their life and call them friends. She blew out the candles. Sophie and Noah cheered. Ethan started cutting the cake while Emily found their 4 least chipped plates. They ate dessert in the living room because the table was too crowded, sitting on the couch and the floor like they were at a picnic. "This is the best birthday I've had in years," Emily said quietly. "Me too," Ethan said. "And it's not even my birthday." "We can pretend it is. I don't mind sharing." Sophie and Noah had already abandoned their cake and were setting up the Monopoly board on the floor, arguing happily about who got to be the car. "I should warn you," Ethan said, watching them. "Noah takes Monopoly very seriously. He's beat me 7 games in a row." "Sophie cheats," Emily countered. "She steals money from the bank when she thinks I'm not looking." "I can hear you," Sophie called from the floor. They played Monopoly until almost 9 o'clock. Sophie did cheat. Noah did take it seriously. Ethan kept making bad investment decisions that made Emily laugh. She won by accident, mostly because everyone else had been too busy talking to notice she'd monopolized the railroads. At 9:15, Noah yawned so wide his jaw cracked. "We should go," Ethan said reluctantly. "Already?" Sophie's face fell. "It's a school night, and Noah needs his nightlights." Ethan ruffled his son's hair. "But maybe we could do this again sometime?" He said it like a question, looking at Emily for permission. Emily knew this was where she should say something polite but non-committal, something that would let them both exit gracefully from this weird experiment. But Sophie was already hugging Noah goodbye, and Noah was hugging her back like he'd known her for years instead of hours. And Ethan was looking at her with those sad eyes that seemed less sad now than they had this morning. "Yeah," Emily said, "we'd like that." At the door, Sophie gave Ethan a hug too. "Thank you for being my birthday cake partner. Thank you for asking about my eyes." Ethan hugged her back carefully, like he was afraid of breaking something. "Best $5 I ever spent." After they left, Emily and Sophie cleaned up in silence. The apartment felt bigger with just the 2 of them again.
but also emptier. Emily kept catching herself listening for voices that weren't there anymore. "Did you have a good birthday?" Sophie asked as they washed dishes. "The best. Even though we're poor and Ethan's rich and we probably don't have anything in common?" Emily stopped washing and looked at her daughter. "Where did you hear that?" "I heard you on the phone with Karen last week. You said we live in different worlds." "We do live in different worlds. But we had dinner in the same world tonight, in our apartment, and it was nice." Sophie dried a plate carefully. "Maybe the worlds aren't as different as you think." Emily pulled Sophie into a hug, getting soap on her shirt and not caring. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just don't notice because you're busy being worried all the time." They finished the dishes. Emily tucked Sophie into bed, read her a chapter from a book about a girl who could talk to animals, kissed her forehead. "Mom?" Sophie said as Emily was turning out the light. "Yeah? Do you think they'll really come back?" Emily thought about Ethan's face when he'd said goodbye, about the way he'd looked around their small apartment like it was somewhere he wanted to stay. "I don't know, baby, but even if they don't, we had tonight, and that's worth something." Across the city, in the car heading back to Lincoln Park, Noah was asleep against the window. Ethan watched the streetlights slide past and thought about spaghetti and Monopoly and the way Emily's apartment had smelled like home. His phone buzzed. 17 emails. A text from his assistant about tomorrow's meetings. A reminder about the Tokyo call at 6 a.m. He ignored all of it. When they got home, Ethan carried Noah upstairs even though he was getting too big for it. He tucked him into bed surrounded by the 6 nightlights that turned the room into artificial day. "Dad?" Noah mumbled, half asleep. "Yeah? Can we go back?" "To Sophie's apartment?" "Yeah, I liked it there. It felt like..." Noah yawned. "It felt like when Mom was alive, before everything got quiet." Ethan's chest hurt. "We can go back. I promise." "Okay, good." Noah rolled over, already drifting off. "Sophie's nice, and Emily makes really good spaghetti." Ethan sat on the edge of Noah's bed for a long time after his son fell asleep, thinking about promises and small apartments, and the way Emily had looked when she'd blown out her candles, like she was wishing for something she didn't quite believe could happen. He wanted to make it happen anyway. His phone buzzed again. More emails, more demands, more people wanting pieces of him that he didn't have energy to give. But for the first time in 2 years, Ethan thought maybe he'd been giving pieces of himself to the wrong people. Maybe what he had left, the small broken parts, belonged somewhere else. In a kitchen that smelled like garlic, at a table with mismatched plates, with a woman who called him out when he tried to fix things with money, and a daughter who asked questions nobody else thought to ask. Maybe that's where the pieces fit. He stood up, turned on one more nightlight for Noah, even though 6 was probably enough, and went downstairs to the enormous empty house that suddenly felt like the loneliest place in the world. Tomorrow he had meetings, calls, decisions to make about mergers and acquisitions and markets in countries he'd never visited. He had a calendar controlled by other people and a life that looked successful from the outside. But tonight, for a few hours, he'd sat on a worn couch playing Monopoly with button pieces and felt more like himself than he had in years. That had to mean something. In her apartment, Emily lay in bed staring at the water stain on the ceiling and thinking about the same thing. About how sometimes the universe sent you exactly what you needed in the most unexpected package. How a $5 bill and a chocolate cake could open a door you didn't know was there. How sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let someone see how you really lived. Small apartment, chipped plates, dreams you'd given up on, and trust they wouldn't walk away. Ethan hadn't walked away. Neither had his sad-eyed son who was afraid of the dark and took Monopoly too seriously. Emily pulled the covers up and let herself imagine, just for a minute, what it would be like if they came back. If this became something more than one strange birthday dinner. If she let herself believe that maybe Sophie was right about different worlds not being so different after all. It was a dangerous thing to hope for. She hoped anyway. The next 3 weeks moved strangely, like time had split into 2 different speeds. For Emily, the days at the diner crawled past in an endless loop of coffee refills and fake smiles and feet that ached by hour 4 of every shift. But the weekends flew by in a blur of noise and laughter and the strange new reality of having people in her apartment who weren't supposed to fit there but somehow did.
Ethan called on Tuesday. Emily almost didn't answer because the number came up as unknown, and she'd learned years ago that unknown numbers meant debt collectors or scammers, or Sophie's school calling to say she'd gotten in trouble for asking too many questions during quiet time. But she answered, and Ethan's voice came through sounding uncertain in a way that made him seem more human than the business article suggested was possible. I was wondering if Noah and I could come over this Saturday, if you're not working, if that's not weird. Emily had been standing in the kitchen folding laundry on the counter because their apartment didn't have space for a folding table. Sophie was at school. The radiator was making its angry noise. Outside, someone was shouting about parking spots.
It's not weird, Emily said, even though it absolutely was weird. Even though she'd spent the past 4 days trying to convince herself that the birthday dinner had been a one-time thing, a strange moment that wouldn't repeat. What time? Whenever works for you, we're flexible. Emily almost laughed. She couldn't imagine what flexible meant when you had billions of dollars and people managing your schedule. 2 o'clock? Sophie gets back from her art class at 1:30. 2 is perfect. There was a pause where Emily could hear background noise, office sounds, someone calling Ethan's name. I should go, meeting in 5 minutes, but thank you for saying yes. Thank you for asking.
After she hung up, Emily stood holding a pair of Sophie's jeans and tried to figure out what she'd just agreed to. This wasn't a special occasion anymore. This was just a Saturday, just hanging out. Like they were actually friends instead of two people from completely different worlds who'd accidentally collided in a bakery. She told Sophie that night over dinner, boxed mac and cheese, because Emily had worked a double and was too tired to cook anything real. Sophie's face lit up like someone had turned on a switch.
Really? They're coming back? Really? Can we make cookies?
Noah said he likes chocolate chip cookies, but Maria only makes the healthy kind with oatmeal and no sugar.
We can make whatever kind you want.
Sophie was already planning it out loud, talking about what games they could play and whether Noah would want to see her rock collection from the park. Emily let her talk and tried not to think about how quickly Sophie had attached herself to the idea of Noah and Ethan being permanent fixtures instead of temporary guests. Saturday came too fast and too slow at the same time. Emily worked the morning shift at the diner and came home to find Sophie had already cleaned her room and set out the ingredients for cookies in careful rows on the counter. You used the step stool without me here? Emily asked, seeing the flower on the top shelf was slightly moved. I was careful. I didn't fall even once. Sophie. Okay, I fell a little bit, but I caught myself on the counter. No blood. Emily checked her daughter over anyway, finding a small bruise on her elbow that Sophie insisted was from school, not from the step stool. They made cookies together, and Sophie talked non-stop about everything she wanted to show Noah, while Emily tried not to burn the first batch, because she was distracted thinking about Ethan sitting in her kitchen again. At exactly 2 o'clock, there was a knock. This time, Emily was ready. Or she thought she was ready. But when she opened the door and saw Ethan standing there in jeans and a jacket that probably cost more than her car, her old car, the one that had died 2 years ago and she'd never replaced, she felt the same jolt of unreality she'd felt the first time. Noah pushed past his father immediately, already talking to Sophie about a book he'd brought to show her. The kids disappeared into Sophie's room before Emily could even say hello.
Hi, Ethan said. Hi. Emily stepped back to let him in. You came. I said I would. I know, Emily closed the door. I wasn't sure if you'd change your mind, if you'd remember that you're a billionaire and I'm a waitress and this whole thing is kind of insane.
Ethan set down a bag he'd been carrying. Emily could see wine bottles, expensive-looking cheese, a baguette that definitely didn't come from the grocery store. I think about that a lot, actually, about how insane this is, and then I remember how quiet my house is, and how Noah smiled more at your birthday dinner than he has in 6 months. And suddenly, it doesn't seem insane at all. Your house isn't quiet because it's big. It's quiet because you're lonely.
I know. Ethan looked around the apartment like he was memorizing it. Your place isn't small because you don't have money. It's small because... He stopped. Actually, no, it's definitely small because of money, but it doesn't feel small. It feels full. Full of junk from Goodwill and appliances that barely work. Full of life. Ethan met her eyes. There's a difference. Emily didn't know what to say to that. She turned toward the kitchen where the cookies were cooling on a rack that was older than Sophie. I made cookies. The regular kind. With sugar and everything unhealthy. Noah's going to lose his mind.
They spent the afternoon doing nothing important. The kids played in Sophie's room with the door open, their voices a constant background noise of imagination and argument. Emily and Ethan sat in the living room drinking coffee that tasted terrible because Emily's coffee maker was from 2003 and barely functioned. "You don't have to drink that," Emily said, watching Ethan take another polite sip. "I know it's awful. It's not that bad. You're a terrible liar. Your eye twitches when you lie." Ethan laughed. "Sophie said the same thing about you. We have that in common, apparently. Twitchy honesty." Emily set down her mug. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why are you really here? And don't say it's because Noah had fun or because your house is quiet. I need the real answer." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. From Sophie's room came the sound of laughter, then Noah's voice reading something out loud. "When Catherine died, people kept telling me I needed to move on, get back to work, focus on the company, provide stability for Noah. All these practical things that made sense on paper but felt impossible in real life. But you did them anyway. I did them anyway. Because that's what you do, right? You keep moving, you pretend you're fine until eventually you convince everyone, including yourself." Ethan looked at his coffee like it might have answers. "Except I never convinced myself. I just got better at pretending, better at filling my calendar so I didn't have time to think, better at telling Noah I was busy instead of admitting I didn't know how to be his father anymore." Emily wanted to reach out and touch his hand, but didn't. "And then Sophie asked about your eyes." "And then Sophie asked about your eyes," Ethan repeated. "And I realized I'd spent 2 years building this perfect wall around everything that hurt, and your 6-year-old daughter saw right through it in about 30 seconds. She's observant like that. It's a blessing and a curse. It's a gift." Ethan finally looked at her. "And so is this. You and Sophie in this apartment where the radiator makes that insane noise and the coffee tastes like burnt dirt. Sorry, but it really does. And nobody's pretending to be anything they're not. I'm here because for the first time since Catherine died, I feel like I can breathe." Emily's throat felt tight. "I don't know what to do with that information. You don't have to do anything with it. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know why I keep showing up." Ethan smiled, but it was sad around the edges. "Also because Noah asked me 17 times this week when we were coming back, and I'm apparently incapable of saying no to my son when he actually expresses an opinion about something." Sophie did the same thing. 17 might be the magic number. They fell into silence that wasn't uncomfortable. Emily looked around her apartment and tried to see it the way Ethan did, not as a place that was too small and too worn and too obviously struggling, but as something full, something real. It was hard. She'd spent so many years seeing only the broken things, the missing things, the things she couldn't afford to fix or replace or improve. The water stain, the carpet, the radiator, the coffee maker that had maybe 2 months left before it gave up completely. But there was also Sophie's artwork taped to the refrigerator, the plants on the windowsill that kept growing despite Emily's best efforts to forget to water them, the bookshelf she'd built from cinder blocks and boards from the hardware store, crammed with library books and paperbacks from garage sales. The quilt her mother had made before she died, draped over the back of the couch with its pattern of stars and moons. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe full was different from perfect. "Can I ask you something now?" Ethan said. "Fair's fair." "Why did you say yes to me coming over? You could have made an excuse, could have let the birthday dinner be the end of it." Emily thought about lying, about giving him some easy answer that wouldn't reveal too much, but he'd been honest with her, and she owed him the same. "Because Sophie's never had a friend who stuck around," Emily said quietly. "Every time she gets close to someone, they move away, or their parents decide we're not the right kind of people to associate with. And I watched her with Noah at the birthday dinner and saw how happy she was, and I thought," her voice cracked slightly, "I thought maybe this time it could be different, even if it's weird, even if we don't make sense on paper." "We don't have to make sense on paper. Everyone keeps telling me we do. My friend Karen thinks I'm insane for letting you anywhere near Sophie. She thinks you're going to, I don't know, suddenly remember you're rich and disappear, and Sophie's going to be devastated. I'm not going to do that. You don't know that. Nobody knows that. People leave all the time for reasons that have nothing to do with wanting to." Ethan set down his coffee mug on the table that wobbled unless you put a folded napkin under one leg. My wife didn't want to leave. She was driving home from the grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon. Some drunk idiot ran a red light. And just like that, she was gone. He said it flatly, like he'd practiced not feeling it. So you're right. I can't promise I won't disappear, but I can promise it won't be because I want to. Emily finally did reach out and touch his hand, just briefly, just enough to say she understood. From Sophie's room came a crash, followed by Sophie's voice saying, "It's fine, everything's fine, nothing broke." Emily and Ethan looked at each other and both stood up at the same time, heading for the hallway. They found the kids surrounded by rocks, Sophie's entire collection apparently, which she'd been storing in a shoebox on the top shelf of her closet. "I was showing Noah my favorite one and the box slipped," Sophie explained, looking guilty. "But none of them broke because rocks don't break when you drop them, usually." Noah was already picking them up, organizing them by size without being asked. "This one looks like a heart, and this one has sparkles in it." "That's mica. I found it by the lake." Sophie started helping. "You can keep it if you want. I have like 50 rocks with mica." "Really?" Noah held the rock like it was precious. "Thank you." Ethan looked at Emily. "Should we help?" "Probably, before they find another box to drop." They spent 20 minutes picking up rocks and listening to Sophie explain where she'd found each one and why it was special. Noah listened with the kind of attention that suggested he actually cared, asking questions about types of sediment and erosion that Sophie couldn't answer, but tried to anyway. "They're good together," Ethan said quietly, while the kids debated whether a particular stone was granite or marble. "Yeah." Emily watched Sophie's face, animated and happy in a way that made Emily's chest hurt. "They are." After the rocks were safely stored in a different box, this one on the floor where it couldn't fall, the kids asked if they could play outside in the small courtyard behind the building. "It's not really a courtyard," Emily warned. "It's basically a concrete square with some weeds and a broken bench." "It sounds perfect," Noah said seriously. So they went outside and it was exactly as Emily had described, concrete and weeds and a bench that had lost most of its green paint years ago. But the kids ran around like it was a park, making up some complicated game that involved rocks and sticks and rules that changed every 30 seconds. Emily and Ethan sat on the broken bench, careful to avoid the part where the wood had splintered. "I should fix that," Emily said, "before someone gets hurt." "I could fix it. I'm actually decent with tools." "You are not fixing my bench." "Why not?" "Because you're—" Emily gestured at him vaguely. You have people who fix things for you. You probably haven't touched a hammer in 10 years. 15 years, actually. But I used to build things all the time, back before the company took off and I had time for hobbies. Ethan looked at the bench like he was genuinely considering it. "I could come over next weekend and fix it, if you let me." "You want to spend your Saturday fixing a broken bench in my sad little courtyard?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I miss building things. Because Noah would think it was cool. Because you need a bench that doesn't have splinters." Ethan shrugged. "Pick whichever reason works for you." Emily wanted to say no, wanted to keep the boundary clear between Ethan's world and hers, but she was tired of saying no to things that might make life a little easier, a little better, just because they came from someone who had more money than she did. "Fine. You can fix the bench, but you're not buying a new one. You're fixing this one." "Deal." They watched the kids play until the sun started setting and the March air got too cold for thin jackets. Back inside, Emily made grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner because it was simple and cheap and she hadn't planned on feeding 4 people. "This is amazing," Noah said through a mouthful of bread and cheese. "It's just grilled cheese. Maria makes ours with fancy cheese that tastes weird. This tastes normal, in a good way." Ethan looked mildly embarrassed. "Maria's very health conscious. She thinks American cheese is basically poison." "American cheese is a national treasure," Emily said. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." After dinner, the kids wanted to watch a movie, but Emily's TV was small and old, and the DVD player only worked if you hit it at a specific angle. They ended up watching something animated that Sophie had seen 40 times, but Noah had never seen because apparently his house had a movie room with a screen the size of Emily's entire wall, and he only watched approved educational content. "That's depressing," Sophie whispered to Emily during a commercial break, because, yes, Emily's TV still had commercials. Be nice. I am being nice. I'm letting him watch a movie with commercials like a normal person. The movie ended at almost 8. Noah was falling asleep against the couch cushions, and Sophie wasn't far behind. We should go, Ethan said quietly, before I have to carry him to the car. Same time next week? The question came out before Emily could stop it, before she could overthink it. Ethan's face did something complicated. You want us to come back? Sophie wants you to come back, and Emily looked at the kids, at Noah's sleepy face and Sophie's smile. I don't hate it. Having people here. It's nice. Nice is better than nothing. Nice is pretty good, actually. At the door, Noah hugged Sophie goodbye without prompting. Sophie hugged him back and made him promise to bring the book he'd told her about, something about a kid who could talk to animals. I promise, Noah said, and my dad's going to fix your bench. I heard. He better do a good job. He will. He's really good at building things. He just forgets sometimes. After they left, Emily cleaned up while Sophie got ready for bed. The apartment felt quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. Less empty. More like the pause between conversations instead of the silence of having nothing to say. She was washing the last dish when her phone rang. Karen's name flashed on the screen. So? Karen said immediately. Did he show up? He showed up. And we had a nice time. The kids played, we talked. He's coming back next week to fix the bench in the courtyard. There was a long pause. Please tell me you're being careful. I'm always careful. No, you're always cautious. There's a difference. Cautious is good, but you're letting a billionaire into your life, into Sophie's life. And I'm worried about what happens when this experiment ends. Emily leaned against the counter and closed her eyes. What if it doesn't end? Everything ends. Not everything. Especially things like this. You're living in different worlds, Em. Eventually that matters. Maybe. Emily opened her eyes and looked at the grilled cheese pan soaking in the sink, at the mismatched plates in the drying rack, at Sophie's artwork on the fridge. But for now, it's nice. And I'm going to let it be nice without waiting for it to fall apart. Karen sighed. Just promise me you'll be smart about this. I promise. After she hung up, Emily stood in the kitchen for a long time thinking about promises and different worlds, and whether it was possible to build something real out of accidental collisions and chocolate cake. She didn't have an answer, but she was willing to find out. The next Saturday, Ethan showed up with a toolbox that looked brand new and wood stain that probably cost more than Emily's entire furniture budget for the year. Noah brought the book he'd promised Sophie, and Sophie dragged him inside before Ethan had even made it through the door. They're efficient, Ethan said, watching them disappear. They've been planning this all week. Sophie made a schedule. Emily grabbed her jacket. Come on, let's look at this bench before you realize what you've gotten yourself into. Outside, Ethan examined the bench with the kind of focus he probably used for business deals. He poked at the broken wood, tested the stability of the legs, made thoughtful noises that could have meant anything. This is worse than I thought, he finally said. Great, so you can't fix it. I didn't say that. I said it's worse than I thought. The whole support structure is compromised. I'm going to have to rebuild most of it. You don't have to. I want to. Ethan was already pulling wood and tools out of his bag. Trust me, this is the most useful I've felt in months. Emily watched him work for a while, surprised by how competent he was with the tools. His hands knew what they were doing, moving with the kind of muscle memory that came from actual practice, not just money. You really did build things before, she said. My dad was a carpenter. He taught me everything before he died. Ethan measured a piece of wood, marked it with a pencil. I was going to follow in his footsteps, actually. Had plans to start my own furniture business. Then I took a programming class in college, and everything changed. Do you miss it? The building. Every day. Ethan started cutting, and the sound of the saw filled the courtyard. Money's great. Success is great. But there's something about making something with your hands, something real and solid that people can actually use. He stopped, looked at the bench. This is going to sound stupid. Try me. Building this bench is going to do more good than anything I've done at work in the past year. At work, I move numbers around and make deals that make rich people richer. Here, I'm making something that Sophie can actually sit on. That actually matters. Emily sat on the concrete and watched him work. It doesn't sound stupid. No? No, It sounds honest. They fell into comfortable silence. Ethan worked and Emily watched, occasionally handing him tools when he asked. From inside the building, they could hear Sophie's laughter through an open window. After about an hour, Ethan sat back and wiped his forehead. Okay, the hard part's done. Now I just need to stain it and let it dry. You're actually good at this. Told you. Ethan opened the can of stain. My dad always said if you can't fix something yourself, you don't really own it. You're just renting it from someone who knows better. That's a good philosophy. It is. I forgot about it for about 15 years, but it's good. They stained the bench together, Emily following Ethan's instructions about grain direction and even coding. Her hands got messy. His did too. Felt normal in a way that nothing else about their situation felt normal. Can I ask you something personal? Ethan said after a while. Depends on what it is. Sophie's father. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but Sophie mentioned he left when she was a baby, and I just... He paused. I'm trying to understand. Emily kept staining, focusing on the wood instead of Ethan's face. Not much to understand. We were young. I got pregnant. He said he wanted to be a father, but when it came down to it, he didn't, so he left. Does he see her at all? Birthday cards sometimes. Christmas, if we're lucky. He has other kids now, 3 of them. Seems like he figured out how to be a father eventually, just not for Sophie. It's fine. Emily finished her section and moved to the next. We're fine, we don't need him. You shouldn't have to be fine with it. What's the alternative? Be angry forever? Spend my life wondering what we did wrong? Emily finally looked at Ethan. Sophie deserves better than having a mother who's bitter all the time. So I'm not bitter, we're just us, and that's enough. Ethan nodded slowly. For what it's worth, he's an idiot. Anyone who walks away from Sophie is an idiot. Agreed. They finished the bench as the afternoon light turned golden. It looked good. Better than good, actually. It looked like something people would actually want to sit on instead of something they avoided for fear of splinters. You should go into furniture making, Emily said. Forget the tech company. Just build benches full-time. Don't tempt me. Ethan started cleaning up the tools. Though my board of directors might have questions. Let them ask. Tell them you found your calling in courtyard furniture repair. Inside, they found the kids had built a fort out of couch cushions and blankets and were reading inside it with a flashlight. The apartment looked like a tornado had hit it, but Sophie and Noah were completely content in their blanket cave. Can Noah stay for dinner? Sophie asked from inside the fort. Emily looked at Ethan. We're having chicken nuggets and frozen vegetables. Nothing fancy. Chicken nuggets sound great, Noah said quickly. We never have chicken nuggets. Maria thinks they're nutritionally bankrupt, Ethan explained. Maria sounds like she needs to relax, Emily said. But don't tell her I said that. They had chicken nuggets and frozen peas that Emily tried to make more interesting by adding butter and garlic. Noah ate like he'd never had processed food before, which he probably hadn't. Sophie was thrilled to have someone who appreciated frozen nuggets as much as she did. After dinner, Ethan helped clean up while the kids went back to their fort. He washed dishes while Emily dried, moving around the small kitchen like they'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. Thank you, Emily said quietly, for the bench, for today, she gestured vaguely. All of this. You don't have to thank me. I know, but I want to. Emily set down the dish towel. I've spent a long time thinking I had to do everything myself, that asking for help made me weak, or made Sophie and me charity cases or something. But this doesn't feel like charity. That's because it's not charity. It's... Ethan paused, like he was trying to find the right word. It's friendship, I think. If that's okay. Friendship with a billionaire, that's a new one for me. Friendship with someone who calls me out when I'm being ridiculous. That's a new one for me too. Emily smiled. Then I guess we're even. When Ethan and Noah left that night, Sophie asked the question Emily had been dreading. Are they going to keep coming back? Emily brushed Sophie's hair, working through the tangles gently. I think so. If you want them to. I do. Noah's my best friend now. You've known him for 3 weeks. So? You can be best friends with someone in 3 weeks. It's about quality, not quantity. Sophie turned around to look at Emily seriously. Do
Do you like Ethan? Of course I like him. He's nice. No, I mean, do you like him? Like romantic like?
Emily's hand froze mid-brush. Where did you learn about romantic like? School. Emma Johnson says her sister has a boyfriend and they're romantic like with each other, which means they hold hands and stuff. I don't like Ethan. We're friends, that's all. Sophie looked skeptical. You smile different when he's here. I smile the same way I always smile. No, you smile like you're actually happy, instead of just pretending to be happy for me. Emily pulled Sophie into a hug so she wouldn't have to look at her daughter's too observant face. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just keep forgetting. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Emily sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and thought about smiling different and romantic like, and whether 6-year-olds could actually see through you better than adults. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Noah wants to know if Sophie would like to go to the zoo next Saturday, if you're both free, if that's not weird. Emily stared at the message for a long time. The zoo. Like a family outing, like something normal people did together. She typed back, that sounds nice, then deleted it and tried again. Sophie would love that. Then deleted that too and finally settled on, yes, what time? The response came immediately. 10? I'll pick you both up. See you then. Emily set down her phone and looked around her small apartment, at the couch where they'd sat together, at the kitchen where they'd made cookies and washed dishes, at Sophie's room where 2 kids were building a friendship that somehow included their broken parents by extension. Karen was right. This was insane. Different worlds didn't just collide and create something functional. Money and poverty didn't mix. Billionaires didn't fix benches in rundown courtyard and eat chicken nuggets with waitresses and their daughters. Except apparently they did. At least in this one specific weird case, they did. Emily finished her tea and went to bed thinking about zoo trips and bench repairs and the way Ethan's hands had known exactly what to do with the wood stain, like he was remembering something important he'd forgotten how to be. Maybe they were both remembering something. Maybe that's what this was. Not 2 different worlds colliding, but 2 broken people figuring out how to be whole again by helping each other fix the small things first. A bench, a dinner, a Saturday afternoon. Maybe that was enough to start with. The zoo trip happened on a Saturday that started with rain. Not the gentle spring kind that made everything smell green and new, but the aggressive Chicago kind that came sideways and made you regret leaving the house. Emily woke up to the sound of it hitting the window and immediately reached for her phone to text Ethan that they should reschedule. But Sophie was already awake, already dressed, already standing at the window watching the rain with a determination that suggested weather was a minor inconvenience rather than a valid reason to cancel plans. It's just water, Sophie said when she caught Emily looking. We're not going to melt. The zoo won't be fun in the rain. The animals don't care if it's raining. They're outside anyway. Emily couldn't argue with that logic, so she didn't try. She got dressed and made coffee and tried not to think about how Ethan would show up in some expensive car and see exactly how shabby their building looked in the rain, the broken gutter, the peeling paint, the front steps that had needed replacing for 5 years. At exactly 10 o'clock, a black SUV pulled up. Not a limousine, which Emily had half expected, but something that looked almost normal if you ignored the fact that it was definitely new and definitely cost more than Emily had earned in the past 2 years combined. Ethan got out with an umbrella, jogged to their building door, and buzzed up. Ready? He asked when Emily opened the apartment door. Are you sure about this? The weather's pretty bad. I checked the forecast. It's supposed to clear up by noon, and even if it doesn't, the zoo has indoor exhibits. We'll be fine. He smiled at Sophie, who was already putting on her jacket. Plus, Noah's been talking about this all week. If we cancel, he'll be devastated. Where is Noah? Sophie asked, peering around Ethan. In the car. He wanted to wait there because he's reading the last chapter of his book and didn't want to stop. Sophie grabbed Emily's hand. Come on, Mom. We can't keep them waiting. The SUV was warm and dry and smelled like new leather. Noah was indeed reading, hunched over a thick book with a dragon on the cover. He looked up when Sophie climbed in next to him and immediately started telling her about the plot, which seemed to involve a lot of magic and prophecy, and chosen ones. Emily sat in the front passenger seat, hyper-aware of how nice everything was. The seats were heated. The dashboard had a screen that probably did 50 different things, There was bottled water in the cup holders, the expensive kind with the Italian name. "You okay?" Ethan asked quietly as he pulled away from the curb. "Just feeling very aware that I'm sitting in a car that costs more than I'll make in a decade." "It's just a car." "It's really not just a car." Ethan glanced at her. "Does it bother you?" "The money thing. I can, I don't know, drive something else if it makes you uncomfortable." "Don't be ridiculous. I'm not asking you to buy a worse car because I'm poor." "You're not poor. You're—" "I'm poor, Ethan. Let's just call it what it is." Emily looked out the window at the rain-soaked streets. "I work 50 hours a week and still have to decide sometimes between buying Sophie new shoes or paying the electric bill on time. That's the definition of poor." In the back seat, the kids were oblivious, still talking about dragons and magic systems. Ethan drove in silence for a minute before saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to minimize that." "I know you didn't, but we can't keep dancing around it. You're rich, I'm not. That's just the reality." "Does the reality mean we can't be friends?" Emily turned to look at him. He was watching the road, his hands steady on the wheel, his face serious in a way that made him look younger somehow. "I don't know. I've never tried to be friends with someone who could buy my entire building without thinking about it. I've never tried to be friends with someone who tells me when I'm being an idiot. I haven't called you an idiot. Not yet, but I appreciate that the option's on the table." That got a small smile from Emily. She settled back in the heated seat and tried to relax. This was fine. They were just going to the zoo, just two parents taking their kids to look at animals. It didn't matter that one of them had a security detail somewhere in the background. Emily had noticed the second car following them 3 blocks back, and the other one had exactly $47 in her checking account. The rain started to let up as they pulled into the zoo parking lot. By the time they got to the entrance, it had turned into a light mist that made everything look soft and gray. Ethan bought tickets without asking if Emily wanted to split the cost, which was good because she absolutely could not afford zoo tickets and had been planning to quietly mention that she'd packed sandwiches so at least lunch would be covered. The zoo was nearly empty because of the weather. They had whole exhibits to themselves, just the 4 of them, and the animals and the sound of water dripping from trees. Noah and Sophie ran ahead to the penguin house, their voices echoing in the enclosed space. Emily and Ethan followed more slowly, keeping them in sight, but giving them space to be kids without parents hovering. "Thank you for this," Emily said. "Sophie's been to the zoo maybe twice in her life, school field trips. I can't usually afford the admission." "You don't have to thank me every time I pay for something." "Yes, I do, because I can't pay you back." Ethan stopped walking. "I don't want you to pay me back. That's not how this works." "Then how does this work? Because from where I'm standing, you keep paying for things, and I keep accepting them, and eventually that's going to make me feel like—" She stopped, not sure how to finish. "Like what? Like charity? Like someone you're helping because you feel bad for us? Is that what you think this is?" Ethan looked genuinely hurt. "Emily, I'm not here because I feel sorry for you. I'm here because my son laughs more when Sophie's around. Because I sleep better on Saturday nights knowing I have Sunday dinner at your place to look forward to. Because you're the only person who talks to me like I'm a regular person instead of a walking bank account." Emily wanted to argue but couldn't, because he was right. She did talk to him like he was normal. And somewhere in the past few weeks, he'd started to feel normal. Not like a billionaire who'd accidentally wandered into her life, but like a friend who happened to have a lot of money. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I'm not good at accepting help, or accepting that people might want to spend time with me for reasons that aren't obligation or pity. Sophie's father really did a number on you." "He did. And before him, a lot of other people who made it clear that I wasn't worth sticking around for." Emily watched the kids through the penguin house window. "It's hard to believe that someone might actually want to be here." "I want to be here." "Okay." "Okay? Okay, I believe you. I'll try to stop thanking you for every little thing and just—" Emily gestured vaguely. "Just accept that this is what we're doing now, whatever this is." "Friendship," Ethan said firmly. "That's what this is. 2 people who like each other spending time together, with their kids who also like each other. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that." But it was more complicated. Emily felt it every time Ethan smiled at her, every time he showed up at her apartment with wine that cost more than her weekly grocery budget and pretended the cheap pasta she served was the best meal he'd had all week. Every time Noah looked at her with the same kind of longing Sophie got when she talked about not having a dad. This was complicated because feelings were complicated, because you couldn't spend every weekend with someone and not start to care about them. Because Ethan had stopped being the billionaire from TV and started being Ethan, who fixed benches and made terrible jokes, and looked at Emily like she was someone worth looking at. They caught up with the kids at the lion exhibit. The lions were asleep, which disappointed Sophie but fascinated Noah, who launched into an explanation about how lions slept 20 hours a day in the wild. "How do you know that?" Sophie asked. "I read it in a book." "You read too much." "You don't read enough." "I read plenty. I just don't remember boring facts about sleeping." They bickered happily while Emily and Ethan stood behind them, close enough that their arms occasionally brushed. Emily was aware of every accidental touch, every moment when Ethan leaned in to point something out, and she could smell whatever expensive soap he used. This was dangerous. This feeling. This wanting. They had lunch at the zoo cafe, where everything cost 3 times what it should and tasted half as good. Ethan bought sandwiches and fries and drinks without blinking. Sophie and Noah pooled their fries in the middle of the table and ate them while debating which animal they'd want to be if they had to choose. "Penguin," Sophie said firmly. "They get to swim and slide on ice, and they dress fancy all the time." "Owl," Noah countered. "They can fly, and they're nocturnal, so they get to stay up late and nobody yells at them." "Does Maria yell at you for staying up late?" Emily asked. "Not yell, but she does this disappointed face that's worse than yelling." "I know that face," Sophie said. Mom does it too." "I do not do a disappointed face." "You definitely do," Ethan said. "I've seen it. Usually, right before you tell me I'm being ridiculous about something." "That's because you are usually being ridiculous about something." Sophie and Noah giggled, and Emily realized they looked like a family, like 2 parents and 2 kids having a normal Saturday at the zoo, like something Emily had stopped letting herself imagine years ago. After lunch, they went to the reptile house. It was warm and humid and smelled like dirt and something vaguely swampy. Noah loved it. Sophie was less enthusiastic but pretended to be interested because Noah was explaining the difference between pythons and boa constrictors. Emily and Ethan ended up standing in front of a glass enclosure containing a very large, very still snake. "That thing could eat a person," Emily said. "Probably not a full-grown person." "That's not as reassuring as you think it is." Ethan laughed. "You're afraid of snakes." "I'm afraid of anything that can unhinge its jaw and swallow things whole." "Fair point." They moved to the next exhibit, some kind of lizard that was supposedly endangered. The information plaque said it was rare and important and losing habitat to development. Emily read the whole thing and felt sad about lizards, which was a weird thing to feel sad about when she had plenty of real problems. "You okay?" Ethan asked quietly. "Just thinking about how everything's struggling, even the lizards." "That's pretty dark for a zoo trip." "I'm a waitress who can barely afford rent. Dark is kind of my baseline." Emily looked at him. "Don't you ever feel like everything's falling apart? Like no matter how hard you work, it's never quite enough?" "Every day," Ethan said. "But I'm a billionaire, so people think I'm not allowed to feel that way." "Are you? Allowed?" "I don't know. Probably not. My problems are different from yours, but they're still problems." Before Emily could respond, Sophie ran up, looking slightly green. "The snake section is gross. Can we go see the monkeys now?" They spent the rest of the afternoon working their way through exhibits. The monkeys were active and entertaining. The elephants were massive and surprisingly graceful. The giraffes were Noah's favorite because they looked, in his words, like they were designed by someone who didn't know when to stop. By 4 o'clock, everyone was tired and damp and ready to go home. The rain had started again, heavier now. They ran to the SUV and climbed in laughing, Sophie and Noah arguing about whether getting rained on counted as swimming with your clothes on. Ethan drove them back through traffic that was getting worse as evening approached. Emily watched the city go by and felt the day settling into her bones. The good, tired feeling of having actually done something instead of just surviving another week. When they pulled up to Emily's building, the rain was coming down hard enough that the windshield wipers could barely keep up. "You should come up," Emily said without planning to. "Wait out the worst of it." "You sure?" "Yeah, I'll make coffee. The terrible kind you pretend to like." Inside the apartment, Emily toweled off Sophie's hair while Noah and Ethan stood dripping by the door, looking uncertain about whether to take off their shoes. "Shoes off,"
Emily said, "and hang your jackets on the hooks. I'll get towels." She found the least threadbare towels in the bathroom closet and handed them over. Then she made coffee, the terrible kind, as promised, and found cookies left over from last weekend. The kids changed into dry clothes and immediately built another blanket fort. Emily and Ethan sat at the kitchen table with their coffee, listening to the rain and the sound of Sophie and Noah's voices from the fort. "Today was good," Ethan said. "It was. We should do it again sometime. Maybe the aquarium next time." "Ethan." Emily wrapped her hands around her mug. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "What are we doing?" "Really? Because this feels like—" She stopped, trying to find the right words. "This feels like more than just friendship. Or maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe you're just nice and I'm not used to people being nice." Ethan was quiet for a long time, long enough that Emily started to regret asking. Then he said, "I don't know what we're doing. I just know that I look forward to Saturdays more than any other day of the week. That I think about you and Sophie during the week when I'm stuck in meetings that don't matter. That Noah's happier now than he's been since his mother died." "That's not an answer." "I know." Ethan looked at her. "The truth is, I'm terrified of screwing this up, whatever this is. Because if I push for more and it ruins what we have, Noah loses Sophie, and I lose you, and I can't—" His voice cracked slightly. "I can't lose anyone else." Emily reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm scared too. I'm scared that I'm letting myself feel things I shouldn't feel. That I'm letting Sophie get attached to someone who might leave. That I'm being stupid for thinking this could work when we're from completely different worlds." "But you're thinking it anyway." "Yeah, I'm thinking it anyway." They sat like that, hands linked across the table, while the rain drummed on the roof, and the kids laughed in their fort, and the coffee got cold in their mugs. "I don't want to rush this," Ethan said finally. "I don't want to mess it up by moving too fast or expecting too much." "Me either. So maybe we just keep doing what we're doing, see where it goes." "Okay." Emily squeezed his hand. "But Ethan, if this is going somewhere, you need to be sure. Because Sophie's already attached to Noah, and to you. And if you decide we're too different or too complicated, it's not just me you're walking away from." "I know." Ethan's thumb moved against her palm, a small movement that sent warmth through Emily's whole body. "I'm not going to walk away. I'm terrible at a lot of things, but I keep my promises. And I'm promising you right now that I'm in this, whatever this becomes." Emily wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this time would be different, that this time someone wouldn't leave when things got hard or inconvenient, or when they remembered that she was just a waitress in a tiny apartment with a daughter and too much baggage. "Okay," she said again. "We keep going, we see where it goes." Ethan smiled, and Emily saw something in his face that she hadn't seen before. Hope, maybe. Or possibility. The idea that broken people could find each other and build something that wasn't perfect but was real. From the living room, Sophie called out, "Mom, can Noah stay for dinner?" Emily looked at Ethan. "Can he?" "If you're offering." "I'm offering, but it's just spaghetti again. I'm not a very adventurous cook." "Spaghetti is perfect." So they had dinner, spaghetti with the sauce Emily had learned to make from her mother, garlic bread from the grocery store, salad that Sophie picked at but didn't eat, normal food in a normal kitchen with normal conversation about school and books, and whether penguins could survive in Chicago if they escaped from the zoo. After dinner, Ethan helped clean up again. They'd developed a system now. He washed, she dried, they talked about nothing important and everything important at the same time. "Maria's going to quit if I keep feeding Noah processed food," Ethan said, scrubbing a pot. "Tell her you're expanding his cultural horizons. To include chicken nuggets and spaghetti? Those are important cultural touchstones. Everyone should know the joy of cheap pasta." "You say cheap like it's a bad thing, isn't it?" "No. Cheap means accessible. Means you don't have to be rich to enjoy it. That's better than the expensive stuff." Ethan handed her the pot. "I had a $100 steak last week at a business dinner. Couldn't tell you what it tasted like. But your spaghetti? I'll remember that." Emily felt her face get warm. "You're just saying that." "I'm not. I'm really not." They finished the dishes in comfortable silence. When everything was clean and put away, Ethan's phone buzzed. He looked at it and frowned. "I have to take this. Work thing. 2 minutes." He stepped into the hallway,
and Emily could hear his voice change, became sharper, more authoritative. The billionaire CEO, instead of the guy who washed her dishes. She'd heard him take work calls before, but usually he ignored them when he was at her place. The fact that he was taking this one meant it was important. She was putting away the last of the silverware when she heard him say, "That's not acceptable. Tell them if they can't meet the deadline, we'll find someone who can." The voice was cold, professional. Nothing like the warm tone he used with Noah or the gentle way he talked to Sophie. It reminded Emily that this was who Ethan was in his real life, someone who fired people and made decisions that affected thousands of jobs and thought in terms of millions of dollars. He came back looking tired. "Sorry, crisis at the Tokyo office. Is everything okay?" "It will be. Just some vendor being difficult." He rubbed his face. "I should go. It's getting late and I have calls starting at 6 tomorrow morning." "On a Sunday? Time zones don't care about weekends." They collected Noah from the fort where he and Sophie had fallen asleep reading. Noah woke up confused and slightly cranky. Sophie woke up long enough to hug him goodbye and then immediately went back to sleep on the couch. At the door, Ethan paused. "Thank you for today, and for dinner, and for—" He gestured at the apartment. "All of this." "You're welcome." They stood there awkwardly, close enough to touch, but not touching. Both aware that something had shifted between them, but neither sure what to do about it. Then Ethan leaned in and kissed her cheek. Just a brief press of his lips against her skin, there and gone before Emily could fully process it. "See you next weekend?" he said quietly. Emily's cheek was still warm where he'd kissed it. "Next weekend." After they left, she stood in the doorway for a long minute, hand pressed to her cheek like she could hold the feeling there. Then she went inside and locked the door and carried Sophie to bed, and tried not to think about how dangerous this was getting. Because it wasn't just friendship anymore. Maybe it never had been. Maybe from the moment Sophie had asked why Ethan's eyes looked sad, they'd been heading toward this. Toward something more complicated and terrifying and potentially wonderful than either of them had planned. Emily got ready for bed and climbed under the covers and stared at the ceiling where the water stain was still there. Still needing to be fixed. Still reminding her of all the things in her life that were broken. But maybe broken things could be repaired. Maybe people who'd lost things could find new things worth keeping. Maybe a billionaire and a waitress could figure out how to exist in the same space without the money and the poverty mattering as much as the fact that they made each other laugh. Maybe. Emily closed her eyes and let herself hope. Across the city, Ethan put Noah to bed and went to his office to deal with the Tokyo situation. He spent 2 hours on calls, fixing problems and making decisions and being the person everyone expected him to be. But his mind kept drifting back to Emily's kitchen, to the way she'd looked at him when he promised he wasn't going to walk away, to the warmth of her hand in his, to the smell of cheap spaghetti and dish soap and the sound of kids laughing in a blanket fort. He'd kissed her cheek. Hadn't planned it. Hadn't thought about it. Just did it because in that moment it felt like the only thing to do. Her skin had been soft. She'd smelled like rain and coffee. She hadn't pulled away. Ethan finished his calls and sat in his office looking at the city lights through the window. From here, Chicago looked beautiful, all glittering lights and possibility. You couldn't see the struggling neighborhoods or the broken buildings or the people working 3 jobs to keep their kids fed. You couldn't see Emily's apartment from here. But Ethan knew exactly which direction it was in. Could picture her there right now, probably asleep. Probably dreaming about something other than him because she was practical and smart and wouldn't let herself imagine things that seemed impossible. But Ethan had built an empire on doing impossible things. He'd turned a laptop and an idea into billions of dollars. He'd survived losing his wife and learned how to be a father, even when it felt like drowning. Surely he could figure out how to bridge the gap between his world and Emily's. How to build something real out of Saturday dinners and zoo trips and the slow, terrifying process of letting someone see all your broken parts and trusting them not to walk away. He just had to be brave enough to try. Ethan looked at his calendar for the next week, full of meetings and calls and obligations he couldn't cancel. But Saturday was blocked out, had been blocked out for the past month. Every Saturday, reserved for the only thing that actually mattered. He added a note to his assistant's morning briefing. Clear Sunday mornings too, indefinitely. Then he went to bed and dreamed about spaghetti and blanket forts and the way Emily's face had looked when she'd said, "We keep going, we see where it goes." They were going somewhere. Both of them knew it now. The question was whether they'd have the courage to get there. The question got answered on a Tuesday in October, 6 months after the birthday dinner that had started everything. Emily was at work when her phone rang. The diner was in the middle of the lunch rush, and Danny had a strict rule about personal calls during shifts. But when Emily saw it was Sophie's school, her stomach dropped and she answered anyway. "Miss Bennett, this is Principal Morrison. Sophie's fine, but we need you to come pick her up." "What happened?" "There was an incident. Sophie got into an altercation with another student. We can discuss the details when you arrive." Emily's hands were shaking as she untied her apron. Danny looked annoyed until she explained. Then his face softened and he told her to go. They'd manage without her. She took the bus because her ancient car had finally died for good 3 weeks ago, and she hadn't had money to fix it. The 20-minute ride felt like hours. Emily's mind spiraled through every possibility. Sophie hurt, Sophie hurting someone else. Sophie in trouble serious enough to involve the principal. When she got to the school, she found Sophie sitting outside the office with a split lip and defiance written all across her face. Next to her, looking equally defiant, was Noah. Emily's brain stuttered to a stop. "Noah, what are you—" "Mrs. Bennett." Principal Morrison stepped out of his office. "And Mr. Calloway, thank you for coming." Ethan was walking down the hallway, moving fast, his face tight with worry. He was wearing a suit that probably cost $5,000, and he looked completely out of place in the fluorescent-lit corridor with its student artwork and motivational posters. His eyes found Emily first, then Noah. "What happened?" "Let's discuss this in my office." Principal Morrison gestured them inside. The story came out in pieces. A boy in Sophie's class, Marcus Williams, whose father owned a chain of car dealerships and never let anyone forget it, had been making fun of Sophie all week, about her clothes, about her apartment, about her mom being just a waitress. Today, Marcus had crossed a line. He'd said that Sophie's dad left because Sophie wasn't worth staying for, so Sophie had punched him in the face. And Noah, who'd been nearby because the second graders and third graders shared a playground, had jumped in when Marcus's friends tried to gang up on Sophie. "Fighting is absolutely unacceptable," Principal Morrison said sternly, regardless of the provocation. He called her worthless. Noah's voice was quiet but firm. "Nobody gets to say that about Sophie. That doesn't give you the right to use violence." "What were they supposed to do?" Ethan asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Let this Marcus kid and his friends beat up Sophie? They were supposed to get a teacher. That's the appropriate response. The appropriate response is for you to do something about bullying before it gets to the point where a 6-year-old feels like she has to defend herself with her fists." Emily was surprised by the anger in her own voice. "How long has this been going on?" Principal Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "We weren't aware of any ongoing issues." "Because you weren't paying attention," Ethan said, "or because Marcus Williams's father donates to the school, so you don't want to look too closely at his son's behavior." "Mr. Calloway, I understand you're upset, but I'm not upset. I'm furious. My son and Sophie did what they thought they had to do to protect each other. If your staff had been doing their jobs, it wouldn't have come to that." The meeting devolved from there. Principal Morrison insisted both kids would face a 3-day suspension. Ethan threatened to pull Noah from the school entirely and make sure everyone knew why. Emily sat quietly, overwhelmed by the whole situation. Finally, Morrison agreed to reduce it to 1 day of suspension if both families agreed to have the kids write apology letters to Marcus. "Absolutely not," Sophie said before Emily could respond. "I'm not apologizing for defending myself." "Sophie." "No, Mom. He said terrible things. He said you were nobody, and that's why Dad left. I'm not saying sorry for making him stop." Emily looked at her daughter, this fierce, brave girl who'd inherited all of Emily's stubbornness and none of her resignation. Sophie's lip was swelling where she'd split it, probably on Marcus's tooth. There was a smudge of dirt on her cheek and fire in her eyes. "Okay," Emily said quietly. "No apology letter." Principal Morrison's face reddened. "Ms. Bennett, if Sophie doesn't comply with the disciplinary measures, then we'll deal with it." Emily stood up. "Come on, Sophie, we're going home." Outside the school, the 4 of them stood in the parking lot. Noah's eye was starting to bruise where someone, probably one of Marcus's friends, had caught him. Sophie's lip was definitely going to need ice. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked Sophie, kneeling down to examine her face gently. I'm fine. You should see Marcus. Sophie, Emily said warningly. What? I'm just saying he looks worse. Noah started to smile, then winced because smiling hurt his bruised face. Marcus cried. A lot. Noah, Ethan said, but there was something that might have been pride in his voice. They stood there awkwardly, two parents trying to figure out the correct response to their children getting into a fist fight. Ice cream, Emily said finally. We're getting ice cream, both of you, because while I don't approve of fighting, I also don't approve of anyone saying Sophie is worthless. Ice cream sounds good, Ethan agreed. They ended up at a place 2 blocks from Emily's apartment, sitting in a booth while Sophie and Noah demolished sundaes that were mostly whipped cream and sprinkles. Emily and Ethan drank coffee and tried not to laugh at the kids' increasingly elaborate description of the fight. And then Noah came out of nowhere, Sophie said through a mouthful of ice cream. Nowhere. Like a ninja, Noah added. And Marcus's friend Tyler tried to grab me, but Noah pushed him and Tyler fell in the mud. It was awesome. Emily caught Ethan's eye across the table. He was trying to look stern, but failing. They both were. Because yes, fighting was wrong, and yes, they should be teaching better conflict resolution, but also there was something fundamentally satisfying about their kids standing up for each other. After the ice cream was gone and the adrenaline had faded, Sophie slumped against Emily's side, suddenly exhausted. Noah was in a similar state, leaning on Ethan with his eyes half closed. We should get them home, Emily said. Come to our place, Ethan said. It's closer, and I want to make sure Noah's eye isn't serious. Emily started to protest, then realized she didn't want to take Sophie back to the apartment and sit there worrying alone. Okay, Ethan's house was in Lincoln Park, which Emily had expected. What she hadn't expected was exactly how massive it was. The SUV pulled through gates that opened automatically, up a driveway that was longer than Emily's entire block, and stopped in front of a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine about places normal people would never go. Sophie's eyes went wide. This is where you live? Yeah, Noah said, like it was no big deal. Inside was worse. Everything was pristine and expensive and carefully designed. The ceilings were high enough to echo. The furniture looked like nobody had ever actually sat on it. There was art on the walls that Emily recognized from museums. I know it's a lot, Ethan said quietly, watching her reaction. It's something, Emily managed. A woman appeared from somewhere in the back. Maria, the nanny Emily had heard about but never met. She took one look at Noah's face and started speaking rapid Spanish, checking his eye with gentle efficiency. I'm fine, Maria, Noah said. You should see the other guy. Maria looked at Ethan with an expression that clearly said, we need to talk about this later. But she didn't say anything in front of Emily and Sophie. Let me show you around, Ethan said. The tour was surreal. Emily saw Noah's room, which was bigger than her entire apartment and filled with toys that looked barely touched. She saw the kitchen with its professional-grade appliances and marble countertops. She saw the library, the game room, the home theater. You have a pool, Sophie said, staring out the back windows. Want to see it? Noah asked. The kids disappeared outside, and Emily found herself alone with Ethan in a living room that probably cost more than she'd earn in her lifetime. This is your real life, she said quietly. What? This. Emily gestured at everything. The house, the staff, the gates. This is who you actually are. And my apartment with the broken radiator and the water stain, that's who I actually am, and I don't know how to make those two things fit together. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Come here. I want to show you something. He led her upstairs to a room at the end of the hall. Inside was an office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The desk was expensive wood. The chair probably cost more than Emily's couch. The computer setup looked like something from a spaceship. But what Ethan showed her was a frame on the desk. Inside was a child's drawing, Sophie's drawing, from her refrigerator. The one of 4 stick figures labeled Sophie, Noah, Mom, and Ethan, standing in front of a small rectangle labeled Home. She gave this to me 3 weeks ago, Ethan said. Said I needed art for my office. I had a Picasso on that wall before, original, worth about $8 million. I put it in storage and hung this instead. Emily stared at the drawing. Why? Because when I look at that Picasso, I feel nothing. When I look at this, I remember what it's like to feel like I'm part of something that matters. Ethan moved to stand beside her. You're right. This house is my real life. The money, the staff, the business, that's all real. But it's not the part of my life that feels like living. That's what happens on Saturdays at your apartment. That's real in a way. All this isn't. But we can't ignore all this. You can't just pretend you're not rich.
I'm not pretending. I'm just trying to figure out how to be rich and happy at the same time.
Because for the past 2 years, I've had one and not the other.
He turned to face her fully. Emily, I'm not asking you to fit into my world. I'm asking if maybe we can build something new. Something that's neither your world nor my world, but ours. Emily wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that it could be that simple. But she'd spent too many years being realistic, being practical, knowing that fairy tales didn't happen to waitresses from rundown apartments. What if it doesn't work? She asked quietly. What if we try this? Whatever this is. And it falls apart. Sophie and Noah are already best friends. If we mess this up, we hurt them too. Then we don't mess it up. That's not how life works. Maybe not. But I'm willing to try anyway. Ethan reached for her hand. Emily, I'm in love with you. I have been for months. I just didn't know how to say it because it seemed impossible. Because you're right. We're from different worlds. But I don't care about that anymore. I care about you, about Sophie, about the way my house feels less empty when I know I'm going to see you in 3 days, about the way Noah smiles now, about the way you look at me like I'm just Ethan instead of Ethan Calloway, the billionaire CEO. Emily's breath caught. You can't just say that. Why not? Because I've spent 6 months trying not to feel this way about you, trying to keep it safe and manageable and friendship-shaped. And if you say things like that, I can't. Her voice broke. I can't keep pretending I don't love you too. The words hung in the air between them. Outside, they could hear Sophie and Noah laughing by the pool. Somewhere in the house, Maria was probably cleaning something that didn't need cleaning. The city stretched out beyond the windows, millions of people living their separate lives. And in this room, 2 broken people who'd found each other in a bakery 6 months ago stood holding hands and trying to believe that love could be enough to bridge the gap between different worlds. So we stopped pretending, Ethan said. Just like that? Just like that? Emily laughed, but it came out watery. You make everything sound so simple. It is simple. We love each other. The kids love each other. Everything else is just logistics. Logistics like the fact that I can barely pay rent and you own a house worth $8 million? $10 million, actually. And yes, logistics like that, we'll figure it out. Ethan pulled her closer. Emily, I've spent 2 years being alone in this giant house. I don't want to do that anymore. I want chaos and noise and Sophie asking impossible questions and terrible coffee and spaghetti dinners. I want you. I want you too, Emily whispered. I'm just scared. Me too. What if I'm not enough? What if you wake up one day and realize you could have anyone, someone who fits better into your life? Ethan kissed her, just leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, gentle and certain, stopping the spiral of self-doubt with the simplest possible answer. When he pulled back, Emily was breathless. You're enough, Ethan said firmly. You've always been enough. You're the one who's been teaching me what enough actually means. Not more money or bigger houses or better investments. Just enough. Just this. Emily kissed him back, rising on her toes to reach him properly. His arms came around her, solid and warm, and for the first time in years, Emily let herself feel safe. Feel like maybe someone would actually stay. They broke apart when they heard footsteps on the stairs. Noah appeared in the doorway, followed by Sophie. Maria says dinner will be ready in 30 minutes, and, oh. Noah stopped, looking at his father and Emily standing very close together. Are you guys dating now? Emily started. Yes, Ethan said. Is that okay with you? Noah considered this seriously. Does this mean Sophie and I are going to be related? Maybe, eventually, if that's what everyone wants. Cool. Noah turned to Sophie. We might be brother and sister. Sophie's face lit up. Really? Maybe, Emily said quickly. We're taking things slow. We're just dating. That's all. Dating is good, Sophie said wisely.
Emma Johnson's mom is dating her teacher, and Emma says it's weird, but also nice because her mom smiles more. Do you smile more, Mom? Noah asked Emily seriously. Emily looked at Ethan and realized she was smiling, had been smiling since he'd said he loved her. Yeah, baby, I do. Dinner was strange and wonderful. Maria had made enough food for 10 people, chicken and rice and vegetables and fresh bread and a salad that probably had ingredients Emily couldn't pronounce. They ate at the enormous dining table that Ethan said he never used. The four of them clustered at one end because sitting at opposite ends felt ridiculous. Sophie kept looking around like she couldn't quite believe where she was. Noah kept looking at his father like he couldn't quite believe Ethan was actually here for dinner instead of working. Emily kept looking at Ethan and trying to process that this was real, this was happening, this impossible thing was somehow becoming possible. After dinner, the kids wanted to watch a movie in the home theater. They settled on something animated that Emily had seen 40 times and Ethan had never seen. They sat in seats that were more comfortable than Emily's bed, in a room designed for watching movies, with surround sound and a screen that made Sophie gasp. Halfway through, both kids fell asleep. The fight had taken more out of them than they'd admitted. Noah was curled up in his seat, and Sophie had her head on Emily's lap. We should get them to bed, Emily whispered. Ethan carried Noah upstairs, and Emily carried Sophie, following him to Noah's room. They tucked both kids into Noah's massive bed without really discussing it, Sophie in her school clothes and Noah in his, both of them too tired to wake up for pajamas. Sophie can sleep in the guest room, Ethan whispered. She'll be scared if she wakes up alone somewhere new. Emily smoothed Sophie's hair back. They're fine here together. They stood in the doorway watching the kids sleep, and Emily felt something settle in her chest. This looked right, felt right. Two kids who loved each other enough to get into fistfights on each other's behalf, sleeping side by side like they'd been siblings all along. Downstairs, Emily texted her neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, to let her know Sophie wouldn't be home tonight. Then she looked at Ethan and said, I should probably go. Stay. Ethan, just to sleep. I just don't want you to leave yet. He looked vulnerable in a way Emily had rarely seen. Please. So she stayed. Ethan found her a t-shirt to sleep in, one of his, soft from washing, that hung almost to her knees. She brushed her teeth with a spare toothbrush still in its package. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and tried to recognize the woman staring back, the one who was spending the night at a billionaire's house, the one who'd admitted she was in love. The guest room Ethan showed her to was bigger than her living room. The bed was enormous and perfect, with sheets that probably cost more than Emily's weekly paycheck. There's water on the nightstand, Ethan said awkwardly, and the bathroom through there has everything you might need. And if you need anything else, my room is just... He stopped. I'm rambling. You are. I'm nervous. Why? Because you're here, in my house, and I don't want to do anything that makes you regret staying. Emily crossed the space between them and kissed him softly. I don't regret it. I'm scared and confused, and this is all completely insane, but I don't regret it. Ethan kissed her back, deeper this time, his hands gentle on her waist. When they broke apart, Emily's heart was racing. Good night, Emily. Good night. She lay in the expensive bed in the enormous room and stared at the ceiling. No water stain here, just perfect white paint and crown molding and the kind of silence that came from quality construction and distance from neighbors. Emily missed her apartment, missed the familiar creaks and the radiator's angry noises and the sound of Sophie breathing in the next room. But she didn't miss being alone, didn't miss the exhaustion of carrying everything by herself. Maybe that was what love meant. Not fixing everything or making problems disappear, but having someone to carry things with you. Someone who saw your broken parts and stayed anyway. She fell asleep thinking about Ethan's hands on her waist and Sophie's drawing on his desk and the way Noah had asked if they were dating with such casual acceptance, like love was simple and obvious and not terrifying at all. Emily woke up to sunlight streaming through windows that didn't have the cheap blinds she was used to. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it came back, the fight, the ice cream, the house, Ethan saying he loved her. She found her phone. 7:30 a.m. Later than she usually slept. Downstairs, she followed the smell of coffee and found Ethan in the kitchen making breakfast. Real breakfast, not the cereal and toast Emily usually managed. He was cooking eggs and bacon, and there was fresh fruit cut up in a bowl. "Morning," he said when he saw her. "I wasn't sure what you liked, so I made everything." "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." He poured her coffee in a mug that matched the others, part of a set that had probably never been incomplete. "Did you sleep okay?" "Better than I have in years." Emily added cream to her coffee and watched Ethan cook. He moved around the kitchen with the same competence he'd shown fixing the bench. "You're good at this. The cooking thing. I used to cook all the time. Before Catherine died. After that, I just stopped. Easier to let Maria handle it." He plated the eggs. "But I've been cooking more lately, on Sundays after we leave your place. Noah and I make dinner together sometimes." He mentioned that. Said you made pancakes that were better than Maria's. "Don't tell Maria that. She'll quit for sure." They ate breakfast at the kitchen island, sitting on stools that were the exact right height, using plates that all matched. It should have felt wrong, this casual domesticity in a house where everything cost more than Emily's car. But it felt normal, felt like they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. Sophie and Noah appeared around 8:30, rumpled and confused about where they were. Sophie climbed into Emily's lap despite being too big for it, and Noah leaned against Ethan's shoulder while they both woke up slowly. "Are we in trouble?" Noah asked, his voice still thick with sleep. "For fighting?" Ethan considered. "Yes and no. Fighting is wrong. But standing up for people you care about is right. So we're proud of you for the second part and disappointed about the first part." "That's confusing," Sophie said. "Welcome to parenting," Emily told her. They spent the morning at the house. Sophie and Noah swam in the pool while Emily and Ethan sat on the patio and talked about logistics. About what dating meant when you lived in different tax brackets. About how to navigate school and schedules, and the fact that Sophie had a one-day suspension to serve. "She can stay here tomorrow," Ethan offered. "If you have to work, Maria can watch both kids." "I can't ask you to..." "You're not asking, I'm offering." Ethan took her hand. "Emily, this is going to take some getting used to. Me having resources you don't. Me being able to offer help that feels like too much. But if we're doing this, really doing this, you have to let me help sometimes." "It's hard, accepting help." "I know, but I'm not helping because I think you can't manage. I'm helping because I want to make your life easier, because I love you, and that's what people who love each other do." Emily squeezed his hand. "Okay, Sophie can stay here tomorrow, but I'm coming over after work to pick her up." "Deal." That afternoon, Ethan drove them home. The contrast between his house and Emily's apartment was stark in the daylight. But Ethan came inside without hesitating, helped Emily make grilled cheese for lunch, sat on the worn couch like it was exactly where he wanted to be. "I should go," he said eventually. "Calls this afternoon. But dinner this week? All of us?" "We do dinner every Saturday." "I know, but I don't want to wait until Saturday." Ethan kissed her, quick and sweet. "Tuesday? Wednesday?" "Wednesday works." After he left, Sophie looked at Emily with knowing eyes. "You love him. Is that okay?" "It's okay. He loves you too, I can tell." Sophie flopped on the couch. "Are we going to move into his big house?" "I don't know, baby. We're taking things slow. His house has a pool. Our apartment has character." "Character doesn't have a diving board." Emily pulled Sophie close and laughed. "We'll figure it out. All of it. Together." The next 6 months were messy and complicated and nothing like Emily had imagined. They fought sometimes, about money mostly, about Ethan wanting to pay for things, and Emily wanting to maintain some independence, about how much time they spent together, about what they told people at work and school. But they figured it out. Slowly, imperfectly, but they figured it out. Ethan started spending more time at Emily's apartment, learning to love the radiator's noise and the way sound carried through thin walls. Emily started spending more time at Ethan's house, learning to accept that some problems could be solved with money, and that didn't make her weak. Sophie and Noah became inseparable. School let them attend together despite the age difference when Ethan made a generous donation to create a mentorship program. Nobody mentioned that the donation was contingent on Sophie and Noah being paired together. 8 months after the zoo trip, Ethan asked Emily to marry him. Not with a dramatic proposal or an expensive ring, just sitting on the bench he'd fixed in her courtyard, watching Sophie and Noah chase each other around the concrete square. "Marry me," he said simply. Emily looked at him.
Just like that? Just like that? That's not very romantic. I'll do better if you want. Get down on one knee. Hire a string quartet. Spell it out in roses. Whatever you need.
Emily thought about it.
Thought about the past 8 months of learning to accept help and let someone in and believe that love could be enough. Thought about Sophie and Noah and the family they'd accidentally built out of chocolate cake and broken benches and the kind of courage it took to keep showing up. Yes, she said. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. No string quartet needed.
Ethan kissed her there on the bench in the courtyard behind the building with the broken gutter, and Emily felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. They got married 6 months later in a small ceremony that was nothing like either of them had imagined. Not in a church or a fancy venue, but in Mrs. Harper's bakery on a Sunday when it was closed to the public. The same bakery where Ethan and Sophie had met, where a $5 bill had started everything. Mrs. Harper made the cake, chocolate with pink flowers, just like the one from Emily's 30th birthday. Sophie walked down the short aisle holding Noah's hand, both of them taking their role as best kids very seriously. Karen was there crying despite having told Emily repeatedly that this was insane. Maria came and brought tissues. A handful of close friends. Nothing elaborate. Ethan wore a suit that probably cost a fortune, but looked exactly like every other suit to Emily. Emily wore a dress from a consignment shop that Sophie had helped pick out. They said vows they'd written themselves, promising to love each other through the hard parts, and the confusing parts, and the parts where different worlds collided. When Ethan was told to kiss his bride, he did it while Sophie and Noah cheered and Mrs. Harper wiped her eyes, and everyone laughed at how perfectly imperfect it all was. The reception was at Ethan's house, their house now, though Emily still couldn't quite think of it that way. Maria had cooked enough food to feed 50 people, even though there were only 20 guests. They ate and danced, and Sophie gave a speech about how her mom smiled different now, the happy kind instead of the pretend kind. Late that night, after the guests had left and the kids had fallen asleep in Noah's room, their room now, redecorated to fit both of them, Emily and Ethan stood in the kitchen cleaning up. "We did it," Emily said, drying a champagne flute that probably cost more than her wedding dress. "We did." "I'm terrified." "Me too." "What if we mess this up?" Ethan set down the dish he was washing and turned to face her fully. "Then we mess it up together, and we figure it out, and we keep going." He took the towel from her hands. "Emily, I'm not expecting perfect. I'm expecting real, and real is messy and complicated, and sometimes it doesn't work the way you planned." "That's very wise." "I've been practicing." He pulled her close. "I love you. Sophie and I and Noah, we're a family now. Whatever comes, we face it together." Emily rested her head against his chest and listened to his heartbeat. "Together," she repeated. 2 years later, Emily graduated from nursing school. Ethan had insisted on paying the tuition, and after months of arguing, Emily had finally accepted. She'd worked part-time at the diner while studying, refusing to give up all her independence even when Ethan pointed out she didn't need to work anymore. Sophie and Noah were there at her graduation, holding a banner they'd made that said, "Mom the Nurse," in letters that were only slightly crooked. Ethan sat next to them, looking prouder than Emily had ever seen him. She'd done it. Finished what she'd started 8 years ago, before Sophie's father left and everything fell apart. Proved to herself that she could build something new even when the old plans had failed. After the ceremony, they went to the diner where Emily had worked for years. Danny had retired and sold the place, but the new owner had kept the menu the same. They sat in the booth where Emily used to take her breaks and ordered coffee and pie. "To new beginnings," Ethan said, raising his coffee mug. "To finishing what you start," Emily countered. "To family," Sophie added. "To family," Noah agreed. They clinked mugs and ate pie, and Emily looked around the table at these 3 people who'd become her whole world. Not because they were perfect, not because everything had worked out smoothly, but because they'd all chosen to keep showing up, even when it was hard, even when it didn't make sense. That night, tucking Sophie into bed, Sophie, who was 9 now and getting too old for tucking in but still asked for it anyway, Emily thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, tired and struggling and convinced that she had to do everything alone because no one else would stay. She'd been wrong. Not about the struggling, that part had been real, but about being alone, about having to carry everything herself, about thinking that asking for help made her weak, Strength wasn't doing everything alone. Strength was letting people in, was accepting that you didn't have all the answers, was admitting you needed help and trusting someone enough to accept it. "Mom?" Sophie said sleepily. "Yeah, baby? I'm glad you married Ethan." "Me too. And I'm glad Noah's my brother now." Ethan had officially adopted Sophie 6 months after the wedding. The paperwork had taken forever, but the day the judge signed the final documents, Ethan had cried. Sophie had a father now, not the one who'd left, but the one who'd stayed. "Me too," Emily said again. She kissed Sophie's forehead and turned off the light, leaving the door cracked the way Sophie liked it. In the hallway, she found Ethan waiting, leaning against the wall with that smile that still made her stomach flip. "Noah's asleep," he said. Finally. He wanted to read just one more chapter. Just one more is never just one more with him. "I know. I'm a terrible enforcer of bedtimes." They walked to their bedroom, the master suite that Emily had redecorated to feel less like a hotel and more like a home. She'd added photos and thrown blankets and the quilt her mother had made, the one with stars and moons that used to live on the couch in the apartment. "Are you happy?" Ethan asked, pulling her close. Emily thought about it, really thought about it. She had a job she'd worked hard for, a family she loved, a house that was slowly starting to feel like hers instead of just Ethan's. She had Sophie and Noah fighting over the bathroom in the mornings. She had Sunday dinners that were chaotic and loud. She had a husband who still washed dishes and fixed things and looked at her like she was valuable. "Yes," she said, "I'm happy." "Are you?" "Happier than I thought was possible." Ethan kissed her softly. "Thank you." For what? For saying yes. To all of it. To the zoo trip and the dinners and the marriage and this whole messy, complicated life we've built. Thank you for asking, for seeing me, for being brave enough to walk into that bakery and let Sophie ask you impossible questions. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet house that used to echo with loneliness but now hummed with life. Because that's what they'd built, Emily realized. Not a perfect life. Not a life without problems or struggles or moments of doubt, but a life full of people who chose each other every day, who showed up when things got hard, who believed that love was worth the risk of getting hurt. Years later, when Sophie graduated from college, she told a story during her speech. The story of a little girl with $5 and a birthday cake and a question about sad eyes. The story of her mother who'd learned to accept help. The story of the billionaire who'd learned that money couldn't buy the things that actually mattered. People ask me sometimes about growing up with a father who had more money than we could spend in 10 lifetimes, Sophie said, standing at the podium in her graduation gown. They think that's what made my childhood special. But it wasn't the money. It was the fact that he showed up, that he kept showing up week after week, even when it would have been easier to stay in his own world. From the audience, Emily watched her daughter speak and felt Ethan's hand find hers in the dark. My mom taught me that being poor doesn't mean being weak, Sophie continued, that asking for help is brave, not shameful, that you can build a life worth living even when you start with almost nothing. And my dad, both of my dads actually, but the one who stayed, he taught me that having everything means nothing if you're alone. Noah was crying openly now, sitting next to Ethan. He'd graduated the year before and was working at Ethan's company, learning the business from the bottom up because that's how Ethan had insisted it happen. The best thing anyone ever gave me wasn't money or opportunities or a house with a pool, Sophie said. It was the belief that I was worth showing up for, that I was valuable just as I was, that love wasn't about fixing people or saving them, but about standing next to them while they figured out how to save themselves. After the ceremony, they took photos and celebrated, and Emily watched her daughter, this fierce, brave woman who'd started everything with a $5 bill and a question, and felt grateful for every hard moment that had led to this one. Because the hard moments mattered, the struggles and the doubts and the fear that it would all fall apart. Those moments had taught them all something important, that the richest life wasn't the one with the most money. It was the one with the most love, the most laughter, the most moments where you looked around and realized you were exactly where you were supposed to be. That night, back at home, Emily found Ethan in his office staring at Sophie's old drawing, the one from second grade with the 4 stick figures and the small rectangle labeled home. She's grown up so fast, Ethan said quietly. They both have. I keep thinking about that day in the bakery. If I'd walked past without stopping, If Sophie hadn't asked about my eyes? If you'd said no to that first dinner? He turned to look at Emily. We almost missed this. All of it. But we didn't. Emily wrapped her arms around him from behind. We were brave enough to try. Both of us. Even when it seemed impossible. Best decision I ever made. Same. They stood like that, looking at a child's drawing that was worth more than any Picasso, and Emily thought about how far they'd all come. From a bakery in March, to a house in June, to a life that was messy and complicated and more valuable than all the money in the world. Because at the end of the day, that's what mattered. Not the big house or the successful company or the nursing degree or any of the things that looked impressive on paper. What mattered was showing up, was choosing to be brave even when you were terrified, was believing that love was worth the risk. What mattered was the moment when a 6-year-old girl asked a billionaire why his eyes looked sad, and instead of walking away, he'd answered honestly. That moment had changed everything, had built a family out of broken pieces, had proved that different worlds could collide and create something beautiful. Emily had learned something important over the years. Money couldn't buy happiness, but poverty couldn't prevent it either. Happiness came from the people you loved, and the moments you shared, and the courage to keep trying even when it seemed easier to give up. She'd been poor and lonely. Now she was comfortable and surrounded by family. Both versions of her life had taught her something valuable. The poor version had taught her resilience and gratitude, and that she was stronger than she'd thought. The comfortable version was teaching her to accept grace and help, and that she didn't have to earn love through suffering. Come to bed, Emily said, tugging on Ethan's hand. In a minute. I just want to look at this a little longer. So Emily left him there with his memories and his gratitude and the child's drawing that represented everything they'd built. She checked on Sophie and Noah one more time, both sleeping peacefully in their respective rooms, both safe and loved and heading into futures full of possibility. And she thought about the $5 bill that had started it all, about chocolate cake and broken benches and the kind of bravery it took to let someone see your sad eyes and trust them not to look away. The story could have ended so many different ways. Ethan could have walked past the bakery. Emily could have said no to that first dinner. Either of them could have decided that different worlds were too different to bridge, but they hadn't. They'd chosen courage over fear, chosen love over safety, chosen to believe that impossible things were only impossible until someone was brave enough to try. And that, Emily thought as she climbed into bed and waited for Ethan to join her, was the real lesson. Not that love conquered all, or that money didn't matter, or any of the simple platitudes people like to pretend were true. The lesson was simpler and harder than that. Sometimes you had to be willing to risk everything for the chance at something real. Sometimes you had to let people help you. Sometimes you had to accept that you were worthy of love, regardless of how much money you had in the bank, or how big your apartment was, or whether your eyes looked sad. Sometimes you just had to show up and keep showing up and trust that it would be enough. And for them, it had been. More than enough. It had been everything.